Gullibility, naivety, and being overly trusting, these traits can be dangerous, sometimes costing a person their life. Yet we all have moments when we want to believe in miracles, that childhood dreams can still come true. When something you've longed for seems so close, you can almost touch it. Caution, common sense, and even self-preservation can take a back seat. It's exactly this vulnerability that criminals prey upon. The case of a young French woman named Elodie Morel in 2005 shocked the country with its brutality and inhumanity. What made it even more horrifying was the cold indifference of ordinary people who knew about her captivity and impending fate, but chose silence for a quick profit. This is a story about how not all dreams come true, and why you can't blindly trust someone who promises to make a fairy tale come to life. Who was Elodie Morel? Elodie Morel was born on February 18, 1976, in Marseille. From a young age, she had a striking, almost angelic appearance. As she grew older, Elodie blossomed into a stunning beauty, with many suggesting she belonged on TV or on the cover of glossy magazines. As a teenager, she became obsessed with the idea of becoming a model. But coming from a humble family, no one took her dream seriously. In the 90s, Elodie sent her photos to various modeling agencies several times but never got a response. After graduating high school, she went to college, married a classmate named Sylvain at 22, and had a son by the age of 25. It seemed like she had let go of her dream of becoming a model for good. By 2005, Elodie was working as a sales associate at a trendy clothing store in downtown Marseille. She frequently received compliments and noticed the admiring or jealous looks thrown her way. At 29, she still had a perfect figure, beautiful facial features, and could easily pass for someone in her early 20s. Even though Elodie never fully gave up on her dream of becoming a model, she no longer talked about it, convinced her time had passed. But in April 2005, she filled out an online application, attached her best photos, and indicated that she was still interested in pursuing a modeling career. The response didn't take long, but the enticing offer from a fashion photographer turned out to be an invitation to slow, agonizing death. A trap for the trusting. Around 2 weeks after she posted her profile online, Elodie received a flattering and tempting offer. She could become the new face of the famous English luxury car company, Rolls-Royce. The contract offered a payment of €1,000 per day for a photo shoot, but to finalize the deal, she had to meet with the photographer and do a test shoot. The meeting was set for May 2nd at a bar in the town of Aigues-Mortes. Thrilled, Elodie shared the news with her husband. Although he was skeptical, he didn't argue. Early that morning, the young mother left her son with her parents, got in her car, and headed to the arranged location. She planned to stay in Aigues-Mortes for 3 days and had already booked a hotel room. That evening, Elodie called her husband to tell him she was on her way to the meeting and feeling nervous. Sylvain wished her luck and asked her to call as soon as she could. It would be the last time he ever spoke to his wife. The last meeting. Elodie arrived at the bar as planned and sat at a table on the terrace, waiting to meet the female photographer she had supposedly been emailing with. But instead, about 10 minutes later, a man in his mid-40s joined her at the table. He introduced himself as the photographer's assistant, explaining that he'd been sent to meet her and pick out locations for the shoot scheduled for the next day. Having no real experience in the modeling world, Elodie didn't sense anything suspicious and took him at his word. The man looked professional, spoke convincingly, and seemed to know all the details from her previous conversations with the photographer. Their chat flowed easily, focusing on Elodie's potential career. In her mind, she was already envisioning herself gracing the covers of popular magazines and thinking about how she would spend the money she would earn. Around 9 p.m., as darkness had fully set in, the man suggested they go scout for the perfect location for the next day's shoot. Aigues-Mortes, a charming medieval town, is filled with picturesque towers, fortresses, and chapels, plenty of spots for a stunning photo shoot. Excited and still unsuspecting of any danger, Elodie left the bar with her new acquaintance and got into his car. She was never seen alive again. What's chilling is that another man who knew the perpetrator personally and had heard about his vile intentions witnessed the entire interaction. He tried to intervene, but unfortunately, his efforts were in vain. A frightened informant. That same evening, on May 2nd, a call came into the Aigues Mortes police station. A frantic man claimed that a young woman was in grave danger and something needed to be done immediately. He didn't know the name of the potential victim or where she might have been taken, but he was sure there wasn't much time to act. The caller was 63-year-old Dominique Tarasco, a nightclub owner who often worked as an informant for the police, providing them with confidential information. He said that earlier that night, he had seen an acquaintance of his, Guillaume Mengot, at the bar. Mengot had ties to the criminal underworld and was known to be a cruel and dangerous man. The previous day, Mengot had bragged about meeting a naive, pretty girl online, whom he planned to kidnap and sell to a brothel in Spain for a hefty price. However, starting the search was difficult. The police had no solid leads, no name, no location, but they knew time was of the essence. By the next morning, they had a name, Elodie Morel. Her worried family contacted the police, reporting that she had been missing since the previous evening and that her phone was off. They explained that she had left for a photo shoot in another town and then simply vanished. At first, the police didn't connect this disappearance to the call from the informant. They suspected Elodie might have run off with a lover, but her family insisted that she would never abandon her young son or disappear without a word. The search for Elodie didn't begin until 3 days after she had gone missing. Precious time wasted. Tragically, Elodie was still alive for 2 of those days, held captive in a house in Aigues Mortes, where she was tortured and abused while her captors decided how to get rid of her. Interrogation of the witness and arrest of the suspects. On May 5, 2005, the lead investigator handling Elodie Morel's disappearance began to suspect that she was the same mysterious woman in danger that the informant had warned about. Dominique was summoned to the station to give a formal statement, and when shown a photo of Elodie, he immediately confirmed that she was the woman he had seen 3 days earlier in the bar with Guillaume Mengot. When asked where he thought Mengot might be holding the victim, Dominique mentioned he'd heard something about an empty nightclub on the north side of town that had recently shut down. A police team set up a stakeout at the location, and by that evening, they apprehended 48-year-old Guillaume Mengot and 53-year-old Richard Lignier as they arrived at the building. The role of the second man in this crime was still unclear and required further investigation. During a search of Mengot, police found Elodie Morel's credit card in one of his pockets, leaving no doubt about his involvement in her disappearance. Both men were brought to the station for questioning, though Lignier was released after a few hours due to a lack of evidence against him. Lignier lived with his family on the outskirts of town and had a friendly relationship with Guillaume, but had never been in trouble with the law himself. The first story. Initially, Mengot claimed he didn't know Elodie and had simply stolen her credit card. According to his first version of events, he was at the bar on May 2nd when he noticed an attractive, well-dressed woman. He assumed she must have money and decided to rob her. Guillaume sat down at Elodie's table, complimented her, and offered to buy her a coffee. She mentioned she was waiting for someone but didn't ask him to leave. They chatted briefly, and at some point he managed to swipe her credit card from the purse hanging on her chair, slipping away before she noticed it was missing. Mengot admitted to knowing the victim, but claimed the entire incident was spontaneous, insisting he only stole her card and had nothing to do with her disappearance. Investigators confirmed he had used the stolen card the same day, withdrawing cash from an ATM on the outskirts of town. However, he couldn't explain how he knew the PIN if Elodie hadn't told him. His story sounded shaky at best. On top of that, a background check revealed that Mengot had multiple prior convictions, including armed robbery, drug trafficking, and a 9-year prison sentence for a brutal rape. Despite his criminal history, Mengod hadn't changed his ways after being released, though he'd become more careful, trying to avoid another trip to prison. The second story. Things took a turn when police found Elodie's phone number in Mengod's phone along with their email exchanges about the photo shoot. This discovery completely contradicted his initial story, forcing him to change his account. He confessed that he had stumbled across Elodie's online modeling profile and started messaging her, pretending to be a photographer. The naive beauty was an easy target, and quickly agreed to meet without asking too many questions. Since Mengod had been using a female alias to communicate with her, he was nervous that she might become suspicious when a man showed up instead of the photographer she was expecting. But Elodie, trusting and eager, didn't find anything strange and agreed to go with him to scout for a photo shoot location late at night, even getting into his car without hesitation, something witnesses later confirmed. Once they drove to a secluded area, Guillaume veered off the main road and stopped the car. He pulled out a gun and demanded that Elodie hand over her credit card. When she refused, he grabbed her purse and found the card himself. Then he began demanding the PIN, but she still wouldn't give it to him. Furious, he slammed her head against the dashboard and started choking her until she finally relented and gave him the code. Afterward, Mengod locked Elodie in the trunk and drove to the nearest ATM to check if she had told him the truth. The PIN worked, and he drained her account. But with the money in hand, he started contemplating his next move, what to do with the woman now locked in his trunk, hiding the victim and the arrest of the accomplices Guillaume Mengod. Needing time to figure out what to do, decided to hide Elodie for a while and drove to his friend Richard Lignier's house. He told Richard about the woman locked in his trunk, mentioning his plan to sell her and make a big profit, which he was willing to share. It's important to note that Richard and his wife had previously worked at the same abandoned nightclub, he as a security guard and she as a cleaner. But when the club shut down, they both lost their jobs and were barely scraping by, with Richard turning to heavy drinking. Richard agreed to help and handed Guillaume the keys to his empty garage, offering it as a place to stash the woman. He didn't want to have any direct contact with the captive himself, preferring to wait for Guillaume to figure things out and hoping to get his cut of the money soon. As later investigations revealed, Elodie was held captive for over 2 days, enduring a nightmare of torture, assault, beatings, and the agony of hunger and thirst. According to Guillaume, he and Elodie talked a lot during those 2 days, particularly about their children, who were close in age. Elodie begged him to let her go, pleading that her son needed her. Guillaume claimed that at one point he actually felt sorry for her and was considering letting her go. He even brought her a bottle of water because it was unbearably hot in the garage, and she had already been there for 2 days. However, on the evening of May 4th, things took a drastic turn when Richard, heavily drunk, decided it was time to deal with the captive. Guillaume claimed that while he was away, Richard entered the garage and strangled Elodie with a rope. Guillaume insisted he had no part in the actual crime and only helped dispose of the body. However, he refused to reveal where they had hidden her remains. The search of the Lignier residence. When police raided the Lignier house with a search warrant, the couple appeared nervous, but not particularly surprised by the events. They let the officers in without resistance and continued eating at the kitchen table, showing little interest in the ongoing search. During the investigation, police found several items belonging to Elodie in their teenage daughter's room, including her cell phone, some jewelry, a hair clip, and a wristwatch. Additionally, Elodie's purse and wallet were discovered in the possession of Richard's wife. Other belongings, as well as torn pieces of the victim's clothing, were found in the trash bin outside the house. Even more disturbing evidence surfaced during the search of Richard's garage, located near their home. Inside the empty space, investigators found brown stains that appeared to be dried blood. They also found crumpled tissues, cigarette butts, an empty plastic bottle, and a piece of laundry rope. Both Richard and his wife were taken into custody, while their 14-year-old daughter was temporarily placed with relatives. When questioned about how Elodie's belongings ended up in their home, the couple claimed that Guillaume had brought everything in exchange for letting him use their garage. They admitted to knowing he was holding a woman there but chose not to interfere as Guillaume had promised to reward them. They also confessed to giving him a bottle of water and a piece of rope upon his request without asking why. The third story. Forensics confirmed that the brown stains on the garage floor were Elodie's blood. Even more damning, semen found on the crumpled tissues matched Guillaume's DNA, and saliva on the cigarette butts belonged to both the victim and the kidnapper. Elodie's family insisted she had never smoked in her life, as she suffered from asthma and cigarette smoke, triggered severe coughing and choking fits. The horrifying picture became clear. Guillaume had kept Elodie in the garage for 2 days, repeatedly assaulting her, likely torturing her, and forcing her to smoke as part of his abuse. Changing stories and evidence. When investigators presented the forensic results to Guillaume Mangot, he once again changed his story. This time, he claimed that he and Elodie had indeed been intimate in the garage, but that it was entirely consensual. He said they had smoked together and talked a lot, and he had finally decided to let her go. However, he continued to insist that Richard Ligné had killed her while he was away, supposedly because Richard feared that Elodie might go to the police after Guillaume released her. This version of events had many inconsistencies, the biggest being that Richard had no reason to kill Elodie. First, he had never even seen the captive, and she hadn't seen him or any members of his family. Second, she had been brought to the garage in the trunk of a car, meaning she had no idea where she was and wouldn't have been able to lead the police there. Lastly, Richard was an ordinary drunk, incapable of causing physical harm to anyone. He was content with being paid in the form of Elodie's belongings and the promise of money from his friend once everything was over. The fourth story. As mentioned earlier, investigators found an empty plastic water bottle in the garage. Guillaume had claimed that he'd taken pity on Elodie and brought her some water. However, tests showed that the remaining drops of liquid in the bottle contained a high dose of powerful drugs. After consuming such a cocktail, Elodie would likely have been unconscious or barely conscious, allowing her captor to do whatever he wanted. When asked why he had drugged her, Guillaume changed his story again. Now he claimed that he had been ready to release her, and they had even agreed that she wouldn't go to the police. According to him, Elodie just wanted to go home to her family and forget about everything as if it had been a bad dream. But she allegedly tried to escape, leading to a struggle in which he hit her, explaining the bloodstains on the garage floor, then locked her inside and left. Guillaume said he had given Elodie the drugs to calm her down and prevent another escape attempt. He crushed some pills and dissolved them in water, then left the garage, returning 12 hours later. By then, Elodie was on the brink of collapse from dehydration. She quickly drank the water, not noticing the strange taste, and passed out within minutes. According to Guillaume, she died accidentally from an overdose because her weakened body couldn't handle the drugs, something he claimed he hadn't considered. Once he realized she was no longer breathing, he placed her body in the trunk of her own car, which had been left in the parking lot near the bar where they first met. A few hours later, he drove the car to Richard's property, using the keys he had taken from Elodie. Even though Guillaume still refused to say where he had taken the car with the body, there were more inconsistencies in his story. For example, the rope found in the garage had sweat and skin residue from both Elodie and Guillaume, indicating that he had likely strangled her. All the evidence pointed against the suspect, and he knew it. Hoping to reduce his sentence, Guillaume struck a deal with investigators and revealed that he had abandoned the car near the old cemetery in Aigues-Mortes. The vehicle was found on May 7th, exactly where he said it would be. It had been sitting in the scorching sun for 3 days, and the body in the trunk had already begun to decompose. The autopsy showed clear signs of torture, beatings, and strangulation. The victim had been tied up, drugged, sexually assaulted, and in the end, strangled to death with a rope. The trial and sentencing, the trial of the 3 people involved in the crime, didn't begin until February 2008. Nearly 3 years after the horrific events, Guillaume Mangot was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 22 years. As for Richard Lignier and his wife, they desperately tried to convince the jury that they hadn't known about the captive in their garage. They claimed they had simply allowed an old friend to stay with them for a few days without asking questions. But the discovery of Elodie's belongings in their home proved otherwise. The couple was charged with aiding and abetting and sentenced to 6 years in prison each. In 2010, Guillaume Mangot and his lawyer appealed the decision, trying to shift some of the responsibility for the crime onto the Lignier. This was their only hope of reducing his life sentence and lowering the minimum time he'd have to serve. On May 4, 2010, exactly 5 years after Elodie Morel's murder, the new trial began. During the hearings, it was proven that Richard and his wife had known about Elodie's captivity and the mortal danger she was in, yet they did nothing. Not only did they keep her belongings, even giving some of them to their daughter, but they also provided Guillaume with everything he asked for: rope, water, and more, without questioning his intentions or considering the consequences. The court reduced Guillaume Mangot's life sentence to 30 years, with a requirement that he serve 2/3 of the sentence before being eligible for parole. The Lignier, for their complicity and failure to act, were each sentenced to 9 years in prison without the possibility of early release. Have you ever wondered how many people go missing around the world in a single day? How about in a whole year? We dug up these chilling statistics, and just imagine, every day, 607 people vanish without a trace. In 1 year, that adds up to 221,644 missing individuals. Over the past 20 years, the number reaches a staggering 4,432,880 people. That's more than the entire population of New Zealand, or nearly the entire population of Ireland. Think about that for a moment. Almost 4.5 million people from each generation simply disappear. But how is it that, in this age of digital information, people can still vanish? Here's the answer. Some deliberately choose not to be found, while others are kidnapped to fuel the black market for organ trafficking, sex slavery, or for illegal medical experiments. And then there are those twisted individuals who take people simply to fulfill their own vile goals. But sometimes the missing are found, and they become another tragic headline. On October 24, 2019, 19-year-old Anniah Blanchard was reported missing by the Auburn, Alabama Police Department. Her parents and relatives launched a massive search campaign, and within days, local authorities joined the effort. Could it be that this young college student's disappearance was just a dramatic teenage stunt? That maybe she'd simply partied too hard or gotten upset with her parents like so many teens do? That kind of behavior might be possible for any other teenager, but not for Anniah Blanchard. Anniah Haley Blanchard was born on June 22, 2000, to Elijah Blanchard and Angela Haley Harris. The family lived in Homewood, Alabama. Her father was a businessman, and her mother was a registered nurse. When Anniah was about 3 years old, her parents split up but maintained a friendly relationship. In 2003, her mother, Angela, met heavyweight MMA fighter Walt Harris, and soon, the two got married. Despite her parents' divorce when she was still a little girl, Anniah had a great relationship with both of them. Over the years, she became a part of 2 different families, finding love and support from her stepmother, Yashiba Blanchard, and her stepdad, UFC fighter Walt Harris. These 2 couples and her older brother, Elijah Blanchard Jr., who was just 17 months her senior, meant the world to her. From a young age, Anniah had a strong maternal instinct, something she picked up from watching her mother work. Anniah's kindness made those around her feel loved and at peace, and she was always ready to listen and lend a helping hand when someone was in need. At 19, Anniah Haley Blanchard was the glue that held her family together, bringing them happiness and strength. Anniah graduated from Homewood High School, where she had a real passion for playing softball. In 2019, she enrolled at Southern Union State Community College, SUSCC, to study early childhood education. Her dream was to eventually transfer to Auburn University and become an elementary school teacher. On October 23, 2019, Anniah and her brother went to visit their mom and stepdad. After dinner, they said their goodbyes and headed back toward the college dorms. Around 11 p.m., Anniah dropped her brother off at his place and continued on her way alone. They lived just 10 minutes apart. She let him know that her phone battery was running low, but assured him there was no need to worry since she didn't have far to drive. Later that night, around midnight, Anniah called a friend. But after that, Anniah never made it back to her dorm. The next day, her family reported 19-year-old Anniah Blanchard as missing to the police. One of the biggest red flags that something was seriously wrong was that Anniah had left her dog Blue alone overnight. Her mom knew Anniah would never do that. That dog was like a child to her. Anniah's phone activity ended at 11:47 p.m., suggesting that her phone either died or was turned off around that time. It last pinged near the Clarion Inn area on South College Street. A massive search effort began. Her parents appeared on TV shows, volunteers posted missing person flyers, and search groups combed the areas around where she was last seen. And all that effort paid off. On October 25th, about 50 miles from where Anniah disappeared, her 2017 Honda CR-V was found in a Montgomery apartment complex. When police inspected the car, they discovered that the interior was covered in blood, and there were serious dents and damages to the exterior, consistent with a collision. According to law enforcement, the damage occurred sometime between Wednesday and Friday night. Days went by, but there was still no sign of Anniah. Her parents were devastated. They continued making appearances on television, desperately trying to keep Anniah's story in the public eye, hoping it would lead to more clues about her whereabouts. A week after she was reported missing, 19-year-old Anniah Blanchard was still officially classified as a missing person. She was last seen wearing a black dress and brown boots while driving her black Honda CR-V. In an effort to get more people involved and help bring Anniah home, a $105,000 reward was offered for any information leading to her whereabouts. But despite the reward, the search for Anniah didn't pick up speed. There were almost no solid leads, or if there were, they weren't being followed up on properly. Let's try to piece together the sequence of events and pay attention to any details that law enforcement might have missed. On Wednesday, October 23rd, just before midnight, Anniah Blanchard was on the phone with a friend. This was the last time anyone who knew her heard her voice. By Thursday, October 24th, a missing person report had been filed with the Auburn Police Department. "We need as many people as possible searching for Anniah right now. This is not like her. She would have come home," said Angela Haley Harris, Anniah's mother. Late Thursday night, her stepfather, UFC heavyweight fighter Walt Harris, posted a video on social media pleading with the public to help find his stepdaughter. But as the days went by, hope began to fade, and her family and friends were left clinging to the hope that she would return. On October 25th, after Anniah's car was found with blood inside, her parents were overcome with despair. On Sunday, October 27th, a vigil was held for the missing teenager who, according to her mother, had been with a man on the night she disappeared. The young man she had just met, that's all. She didn't say where she met him, how she met him, or where they went. She just said she was with this guy she'd just met, but my daughter wouldn't just go off with a complete stranger, Haley Harris explained. On Monday, October 28th, the police released surveillance footage showing Anniah entering a convenience store around 11:21 p.m. to buy some potato chips. By October 30th, a task force had been assembled, made up of more than 60 agencies, including the FB1, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences. The disappearance of Anniah Blanchard triggered a massive search operation. The multi-agency task force, which included the FB1, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences, was actively involved in the search. The case quickly gained national media attention. The only real lead the police had was Anniah's damaged car, which was abandoned near an apartment complex in Montgomery. The car showed signs of a collision, and blood was found on the front passenger seat. The Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences confirmed that the blood belonged to Anniah Blanchard, indicating she might have suffered a life-threatening injury. Investigators also discovered a bullet hole in the passenger door and shell casings in the left cup holder. Police noted a strong smell of cleaning solution in the car. Despite this, there were still no suspects or solid leads pointing investigators in the right direction. As time passed, detectives had no choice but to dig deeper into the existing evidence. When detectives took a closer look at the surveillance footage from the convenience store where Anniah was last seen, they noticed a black man lingering near her. On November 6th, the Auburn Police Department released an image from surveillance footage showing a man who could be of interest in the investigation. Detectives identified the man and were waiting to speak with him. The individual was described as a black man between 20 and 30 years old, weighing around 200 pounds and standing between 5 feet 8 inches and 5 feet 10 inches. He was last seen wearing dark pants, dark shoes, and a camo hoodie with the word Vans printed in white on the back. Police reported that the suspect left the area in a silver or gray Lincoln Town car from the early 2000s. The next day, the man was identified as 29-year-old Ibrahim Yazid from Montgomery. Surveillance footage confirmed that he had been in the store at the same time as Anniah. The video shows him buying alcohol while persistently looking over at Anniah. He was later caught on camera exiting Anniah Blanchard's car from the passenger side. Footage from another gas station showed him getting back into her car on the passenger side again. Afterward, Anniah and Ibrahim drove away together. But if the bullet hole was in the passenger seat, why was the blood Anniah's? Eyewitness accounts confirmed that on that night, Anniah Blanchard and Ibrahim Yazid were seen talking near her car by the store. One witness claimed she saw Ibrahim force Anniah into the car before driving off in her vehicle. According to detectives, this witness shared what she saw with a friend, but neither of them intervened to help the stranger. By all accounts, Ibrahim forcibly put Anniah in the passenger seat. At the time of Anniah Blanchard's disappearance, Ibrahim Yazid already had a long criminal record and was out on a $295,000 bond, facing charges of marijuana possession, robbery, and attempted murder. By age 30, Ibrahim had accumulated almost every crime in the book, including violent offenses, except for an actual homicide. The suspect was also accused of attempting to kill 2 police officers in 2012 when he rammed into their car and was arrested in 2017 for aggravated assault on a police officer. He had a history of assaulting officers with weapons, dealing synthetic drugs, and participating in robberies. In one escape attempt, he even crashed into a police car. Yet, shockingly, the court kept releasing this repeat offender on bail, or giving him minimal punishment. In June 2020, Ibrahim Yazid was charged with the 2018 murder of Stephen Hamby. He was also charged with the attempted murder of a woman who was shot in the face during the same incident that killed Stephen Hamby. Somehow, despite all of this, he was still walking free. Auburn Police Chief Paul Register stated, "Further investigation and analysis of the evidence determined that Yazid was at the same location where Anniah Blanchard was last seen, and he was involved in abducting Anniah against her will. There's no reason to believe that Ibrahim knew Anniah. She may have just been a random target of a carjacking." Officials didn't rule out more arrests and continued searching for any accomplices of the suspect. An arrest warrant was issued for 30-year-old Ibrahim Yazid, who was wanted on first-degree kidnapping charges and had a history of arrests for violent crimes. Authorities actively searching for Yazid warned that the man from Montgomery might be armed and dangerous. On November 7th, police issued an arrest warrant for Ibrahim Yazid on first-degree kidnapping charges. After the warrant was issued, authorities spent about 12 hours looking for him. This happened 2 days after the surveillance footage of the man believed to be Yazid was released. A tip led police to Pensacola, where the Florida Regional Fugitive Task Force tracked him down near an interstate exit. At around 2:30 a.m., Yazid was taken into custody at the Escambia County Jail in Florida on kidnapping charges and later agreed to be extradited back to Alabama. He was denied bail since he was considered a fugitive wanted in another state. Anniah Blanchard's family feared that her warm, bubbly nature might have put her in a dangerous situation, and her willingness to help others led her right into the hands of criminals. She's just someone who lifts everyone's spirits and brings happiness. She's so full of life. It pains me to say this, but maybe that's what got her into this situation. She was so trusting, and I think someone might have taken advantage of that, her mother said in yet another interview. The family also dismissed rumors that Anniah had plans to meet up with some guy the night she disappeared, stating they went through her social media accounts and confirmed that Anniah hadn't been talking to anyone other than her family and her roommate. One of the last messages Anniah sent was a Snapchat to her roommate saying she was with a guy she had just met. But Haley Harris didn't believe Anniah wrote that message because the wording and style didn't sound like her daughter at all. She chose not to share further details about that message. As investigators suspected, Ibrahim had accomplices who helped cover up the carjacking and were with him the night Anniah went missing. The investigation hit another dead end until police arrested a second suspect, Antoine "Squirmy" Fisher, on November 22nd. Later, a prosecutor revealed that Fisher had helped Yazid switch to another car and provided him with money when he fled to Florida. Before detectives could fully question Fisher, the kidnapping case had turned into a crime. On November 23rd, police arrested a third suspect, David Johnson Jr., and charged him with hindering prosecution. Charges against Fisher and Johnson were eventually dropped. Lee County District Attorney Brandon Hughes declined to say how Johnson was obstructing the prosecution. A gag order on the case prevents attorneys, prosecutors, and witnesses from talking to the media about the details. According to Fisher, Ibrahim Yazid arrived at David Johnson Sr.'s house on October 24, 2019, sometime between 5 and 6 a.m. Fisher claimed he saw Anniah Blanchard's car parked near some bushes at that time. Yazid allegedly told Fisher he needed more gas for the stolen vehicle. Fisher drove Yazid to a gas station where they filled up a can with gasoline before returning to Johnson's house. Yazid reportedly told Fisher he needed to grab something, so Fisher drove him north on Interstate 85 toward Shorter. Fisher said they stopped in Montgomery, where Yazid picked up what he needed, an assault rifle. Afterward, they drove to a cemetery off I-85. There, Fisher claimed he saw Yazid dragging something that looked like 2 legs wrapped in a blanket. Yazid supposedly spent some time in the woods before coming back to the car. By the end of November, hope of finding Anniah alive had all but disappeared. On November 25th, police came across discarded human remains. They were discovered in Macon County, in a wooded area off County Road. Investigators found a skull with what appeared to be a bullet hole in the top. Alongside the remains, they found clothing that matched what Anniah Blanchard was last seen wearing, as well as a lead projectile. On November 27th, the remains were officially identified as those of Anniah Blanchard. An autopsy revealed that she had been killed by a gunshot wound to the head. As a result, the charges against Yazid were upgraded from first-degree kidnapping to capital murder. He was charged with 2 counts of capital murder, one for committing the crime inside a vehicle with a deadly weapon while the victim was in the vehicle, and another for committing murder during a first-degree kidnapping. The preliminary hearing was delayed multiple times due to the COVID-19 outbreak, but the public and Anniah's family patiently awaited the harshest penalty for the man who took their beloved daughter from them. Yazid, accused of kidnapping 19-year-old Anniah Blanchard, appeared in court for a preliminary hearing on November 20th. Yazid's attorney, Elijah Beaver, filed a motion requesting a hearing, simply stating that his client was entitled to a preliminary hearing on the kidnapping charges since, according to him, Yazid didn't kill her, but only resisted when Anniah pulled out a weapon. The next hearing took place in June, where Auburn Police Detective Josh Mixon testified about the case. Defense attorneys challenged the prosecution's claim that the crime was committed in Lee County. After reviewing the evidence, Judge Russell Bush found probable cause to present the case to the Lee County grand jury. According to court records, Anniah Blanchard fought back against the criminals who tried to steal her car. She knew how to handle a firearm and could defend herself, but the experienced criminal was quicker than the young woman. It's worth noting that on March 6, 2023, Ibrahim Yazid still hadn't entered a guilty plea to any of the charges against him, so he remains in custody without bail as he awaits trial, which has been postponed multiple times due to the COVID-19 pandemic and other legal reasons. However, without bail or a direct dismissal of the case, 34-year-old Ibrahim Yazid will stay in the Lee County Sheriff's Office jail until his final conviction or acquittal. Anniah Blanchard's disappearance and death drew nationwide attention and media coverage. Her death led to the creation of Anniah's Law, which reformed Alabama's bail laws as her accused killer, Ibrahim Yazid, was out on bail when Anniah was killed. The Alabama state constitution guarantees the right to bail for all defendants, except those charged with capital offenses. Yazid had been released on bail after being charged with kidnapping and attempted murder, which are not capital offenses. Anniah's Law expands the exceptions to include other serious crimes like arson, burglary, domestic violence, aggravated child abuse, assault, robbery, kidnapping, human trafficking, rape, sexual torture, terrorism, and homicide. Prosecutors will be allowed to request a bail hearing, which the judge can either grant or deny. If the hearing is held, the defendant will be allowed to testify, present witnesses, and cross-examine witnesses. Prosecutors will need to demonstrate that the defendant is a flight risk or a danger to public safety. The judge can then either approve or deny bail. As of November 8, 2022, Anniah's Law, House Bill 81, was passed by Alabama voters. A scholarship in memory of Anniah Blanchard was established by the Homewood City Schools. In June 2020, a bench in Patriot Park in Homewood was dedicated to her. Today, we will find ourselves in the state that occupies almost 3/4 of the island of Haiti. This amazing country attracts tourists from all over the world with the opportunity to relax on snow-white beaches, as if descended from advertising brochures, to touch almost untouched by man-exotic nature, to taste the unique local cuisine, and of course, it is Dominican Republic. Our story begins on the Azure Coast, one of the most popular beaches of the Dominican Republic. A black Honda Accord stopped in a parking lot by the beach. Music was playing softly in the car. 2 men and 3 girls were talking passionately about general topics. They looked like longtime friends who had met for a fun outing. All the passengers got out of the car and walked leisurely towards the sea. A grown man called out to one of the girls and took her hand. He whispered something in her ear, and she shouted to her friends that she would come back later. The beach was practically deserted in the evening, making it a place of rendezvous and solitude. They hurriedly got into the car and talked for a long time. The man stroked her long hair, touched her plump lips, which like a powerful magnet attracted his kisses. A few hours after the walk, the girl returned home and went to bed. The next morning, her mother noticed that her daughter had not come to breakfast. She went to her daughter's room and knocked on the door, hoping that the knock would wake her up, but she was met with silence. The woman entered the room and screamed. At the scream, the girl's father came running in. A terrible picture appeared before the parents. The whole bed was flooded with blood, and in the bathroom on the floor in a pool of blood lay their daughter. She was dead. From what they saw, the couple's legs gave out, but the father found the strength to call the police. Around 8 a.m., police arrived at the scene, examined the girl's room, interviewed the parents. The body was taken to the National Institute of Forensic Medical Examination to establish the cause of death. The parents cried and wondered what could have happened to their daughter at home at night. But unfortunately, the events preceding this tragedy began to develop much earlier and escaped the parents' eyes. Today before us will be a modern story of impossible love between a grown man and a young girl. She will be 16-year-old Esmeralda Reaches. Esmeralda Reaches Martinez was born August 23, 2006 in the province of La Altagracia, in the family of restaurant owners Eligio Riscosti and Isabel Martinez Reaches. She grew up in a complete happy family, had an older sister with whom she was very friendly. Esmeralda grew up to be a very pretty and bright girl. She loved to sing, dance, and displayed her special artistry, which she was proud to show in videos for social media. In 2023, Esmeralda was in her senior year of high school and was planning to go to university. She was always surrounded by friends because the girl's cheerfulness attracted not only her peers to her. 35-year-old John Kelly Martinez was among Esmeralda's close friends. John Kelly entered the public education system after passing a competitive teacher's exam and was undergoing induction for new teachers and was still on probation, which lasted for 1 year. The pupils took a great liking to the new teacher, as he treated them like friends and had regular outings outside of school. Despite the fact that John was married to another teacher and had 2 daughters, he devoted most of his free time to his students. For a long time, the teacher painstakingly built a trusting relationship with them, disposing them to him. They were mostly bright and beautiful students, such as Esmeralda. The evening walk on February 12, 2023, was a perfectly normal meeting of teacher and female students outside of school. Esmeralda was the last person John Kelly picked up that evening. He followed her into the house. He introduced himself as a teacher and promised to bring her back home. The group of 2 grown men and 3 young female students then headed to the beach in Teacher Kelly's car. After stopping, everyone got out of the car except John Kelly and Esmeralda. John and Esmeralda were alone for a while, but afterward joined the company. They drank a few beers and took a short walk along the shoreline. Suddenly, Esmeralda felt sick. The girl started bleeding. The walk had to be cut short and she had to be brought back home. In the morning, her parents found her dead. An autopsy revealed that it was a homicide, but the parents did not get answers to their questions. The National Institute of Forensic Medicine tentatively determined that Esmeralda Riches' death was due to a perineal laceration with severe internal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock following the violent acts. As a result of the autopsy, the girl's death was classified as a violent death of undetermined cause. But who dared to do such a thing when Esmeralda was in familiar company on a walk, supervised by a teacher? Interviews with the girlfriends and a review of the seized phones provided clarity and identified the first suspect. The testimony of one of the girls who had been out with the teacher and Esmeralda that evening was stunning. She said she saw the professor slip 5 pills into Esmeralda's drink while they were on the beach. The initial findings of the police also sparked a lot of talk in the Dominican Republic, where abortion is banned. There was a lot of speculation in the community about the cause of Esmeralda's death. Some said she died of a heart attack, and some were sure she died from blood loss caused by the abortion pills John Kelly had given her. Everyone hoped that the medical examiner's report would put an end to the rumors and speculation. However, all the speculation dissipated when the results of the forensic examination were ready. Upon learning the results of the forensic examination, which ruled out the possibility of pregnancy, Esmeralda's relatives were clearly puzzled and very skeptical. The victim's relatives stated that the family was unhappy that the report ruled out Esmeralda's pregnancy because this theory best matched what investigators had found out based on the forensic examiner's tests and findings, as well as the evidence collected during the investigation. After all, a review of the phones of Esmeralda's friends revealed many text messages that, although indirectly, but indicated the teacher's long-term interest in the student. After the unsuccessful version of pregnancy, the investigation concluded that John Kelly drugged the girl without her consent and roughly abused her on the beach, which led to profuse blood loss and a few hours later to the death of Esmeralda. The results of repeated toxicology tests were pending. Given the progress of the investigation, The prosecutor's office requested a coercive measure against John Kelly Martinez and his alleged accomplice, Ruben Murillo Martinez, as they are the main suspects in the young woman's death. John Kelly Martinez was suspended as a teacher for 90 days without pay. Because of the evidence collected against him, the prosecutor's office requested a year of preventive detention against John Kelly as the prime suspect in Esmeralda's death. Let me remind you that preventive detention is the imprisonment of a person, not as a punishment for a crime he or she has committed, but as a means of preventing the possible commission of criminal acts by that person for a period of time. New episodes and interviews with witnesses about the student's death, however, have created even more intrigue surrounding this horrific tragedy. After several interrogations, authorities learned that due to severe bleeding, the entire company had to stop several times along the way to help her. But no one took the bleeding Esmeralda to the hospital or called emergency services. Some of these stops were captured by surveillance cameras where, according to witnesses, the defendants bought alcoholic beverages and Esmeralda and John went into the restroom together. Later, they also went into the pharmacy to buy medicine, water, and feminine hygiene pads. It was later established that Esmeralda had to completely change her clothes at one of the stops because her own were completely soaked in blood. After Esmeralda was taken home, her parents also noticed that she was bleeding heavily, and thinking it was a woman's cycle, the mother simply gave her daughter a painkiller to make her fall asleep. It was learned from one of the girl's cell phones that Esmeralda had sent her an audio message in the early morning hours asking for help and saying, "Please help me. I'm bleeding." But unfortunately, the friend listened to the help recording too late. The next day, Esmeralda was found breathless on the floor of her bathroom, completely bloodied. On February 14th, John Kelly Martinez was arrested by police and his home was searched a day later, during which the clothes he was wearing that night while out with his female students were seized. His cousin, who was the second man that night, Ruben Murillo, was also accused of trying to hide John's bloody pants. There are many ambiguities in the investigation into the event. The prosecutor's office should have clarified the situation rather than making new speculations about an event that alarmed the public. The public demanded a quality investigation to find out the real cause of the young girl's death. Many felt that the obvious facts that were on the surface had not been taken into account by the investigation. This involved not only a search of the house where the teacher and his family lived, but also the very car in which the crime against Esmeralda may have taken place, which triggered the bleeding. The car was urgently requested by the authorities, but as it turned out, it was sold in a hurry by John Kelly's wife. The investigation believed that such a hasty sale of the car was a fact of hiding evidence that could prove violent acts. The purchaser of the automobile was Paniagua Pillier. After it was learned that a coercive measure would be sought for alleged complicity in the case against J.C. Espinal Rijo, John Kelly's wife, and Frank Paniagua, who was the new owner of the car was finally inspected. But other than traces of blood that belonged to Esmeralda in the car, no other evidence was found. The court ruling determined that there was not enough evidence to keep J.C. Espinal Rijo in jail, and she was released. The investigation continued for several months. The prosecutor launched his own investigation and re-interviewed the 3 girls who accompanied Esmeralda, testimony that helped investigators reconstruct the events of that night minute by minute. At 7:30 p.m., John Kelly Martinez, 35, and his cousin Ruben Murillo Martinez went to the home of Esmeralda Riches in La Otra Banda, Iguay, with 3 other girls in the passenger compartment of the car. John excused Esmeralda from her mother, introducing himself as her teacher and telling her of the exciting evening that awaited her daughter and the other students. Esmeralda went along with him. It turned out that originally, the whole company was going to go to the fair with amusement rides, but on the way, John changed his mind and changed the destination. Most likely, John Kelly did not intend to go to the fair, but preferred a quiet Macau beach. On the way to the beach, John stopped the car at a store where he bought a beer, and returning to the car, he asked his brother to sit in the back seat, while Esmeralda sat in the front. The man had a thermos with him into which he poured the beer and added 5 unknown pills to the drink. He offered it to Esmeralda without informing her of the contents of the thermos, but it was noticed by one of the girlfriends. Arriving at the beach, the 3 girls got out of the car, leaving Esmeralda and John Kelly alone. They were alone in the car for about 30 minutes, and of course their prolonged absence was noticed by Esmeralda's friends as well. After a moment without explanation, John appeared and told everyone to get in the car as they were leaving urgently. They had to make several stops along the way because Esmeralda started bleeding heavily. One of the stops was at 9:45 when they stopped at a gas station parking lot where, according to eyewitnesses and CCTV footage, Esmeralda used the cafeteria restroom. Esmeralda's classmate said she asked to stop at the gas station because she needed to visit the ladies' room, and when she went in there with her friends, they noticed her clothes were soaked with blood. There was a lot of blood in the restroom, so much so that the girls had to mop the floor. The girlfriends tried to help Esmeralda. They were very frightened and asked the woman working at the gas station if it was normal, and she said it was not normal and advised them to see a doctor immediately. The girls told John Kelly about it, but the man refused to go to the hospital, saying that if he did, he would go to jail. According to the inspection document, traces of Esmeralda Riches's blood were found both in the parking lot and in the service restroom at the gas station. They also stopped at a pharmacy at 10:21 p.m., where they bought some medication, water, and sanitary pads. Authorities obtained surveillance footage and a receipt for the purchase to verify the facts. At 11 p.m., John Kelly returned Esmeralda to her home. She arrived with heavy bleeding that began minutes after she was left alone in the car with her teacher. On February 16th, an official report came back stating that the girl had been very severely and brutally abused, resulting in severe blood loss and hypovolemic shock. As scary as it sounds, this condition could have been stabilized and medics know how to effectively help a person, but unfortunately, Esmeralda never made it into the life-saving hands of doctors that night. Toxicology testing confirmed the presence in Esmeralda's body of the active ingredient in the pills used to terminate a pregnancy, but it was previously confirmed that Esmeralda was never pregnant. This component is a synthetic gestagen with contraceptive effects. When taken orally in the recommended dosing regimen, this component suppresses ovulation and fertilization, which most likely indicates that the teacher John Kelly was preparing for intimacy with the student he liked. After repeated medical examinations, Esmeralda's body was finally allowed to be buried. The young girl was buried in the El Banal Public Cemetery. Esmeralda's family and friends said goodbye to her. They described her as a kind and cheerful girl. Her parents bitterly recalled that fateful evening and blamed themselves for entrusting their daughter to a teacher and letting her go for an evening walk with him. On June 4th, 2023, after reconstructing the last hours of Esmeralda Riches's life, prosecutors filed charges against math and physical education teacher John Kelly Martinez. On June 12th, the La Altagracia prosecutor's office filed an indictment and a request to open a trial against Martinez and his cousin Rubiel Murillo Martinez with the La Altagracia Instructional Court. The case was scheduled to be heard on August 23, 2023. However, due to the passage of Storm Franklin, the case against the teacher was rescheduled. On November 24, 2023, the judge ordered that John be retried as the sole defendant in the death of Esmeralda Riches. The trial was scheduled to begin on January 9, 2024, but was again rescheduled because only half of the witnesses called were present. The trial is scheduled for February 1st and 6, 2024. Before the Collegiate Court of the Penitentiary Chamber of First Instance of La Altagracia, the defense attorney urged the court to note that his client can only be charged with violence and accuses the parents of not taking action to avoid the death of their daughter, knowing about her problem. The prosecution, for its part, presented more than 40 pieces of evidence. including witness testimony and examination reports. During the hearing, the prosecution also heard testimony from pathologists and forensic experts, who showed the audience all the audio and video materials that had been collected during the painstaking and long work to determine the cause of the girl's death. In his closing statement, the defendant tried to make himself look like a victim. John Kelly Martinez admitted that he and Esmeralda were indeed close that night in the car, but he sincerely tried to assure the court and everyone present that everything was consensual. The important fact, he said, was that when he brought Esmeralda home, she was alive and well. The motion to compel specifies that Martinez voluntarily inflicted the victim with lacerations, abrasions, and contusions that resulted in her death, with severe acute external and internal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock as the terminal mechanism of death, according to the autopsy report. John Kelly Martinez's speech made no impression on the court or those in the audience. On March 14, 2024, Professor John Kelly Martinez, 36, was sentenced to 20 years in prison for violence. John Kelly Martinez will serve his prison term at the Anniah Correctional and Rehabilitation Center in Higüey. Rubiel Murillo Martinez, cousin of the defendant charged with accessory after the fact, received a conditional enforcement measure consisting of periodic court appearances. Following the enforcement measure against the professor and his cousin, Rich's family attorney, Raimundo Rosario, said the family was satisfied with the restraining measure and would not file a motion to reopen the investigation. The verdict for John eased the pain of Esmeralda's parents a bit. They thanked everyone involved in the investigation and trial. They also indicated that they were satisfied with the verdict. Esmeralda's family did not experience the joy of the teacher's verdict because the acute pain of losing their daughter was forever lodged in their souls. Esmeralda's mother, Isabel Martinez, said she regretted letting her daughter walk with this blessed teacher and 3 friends. I talked to him on the phone and asked, "Are you a teacher?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And I told him, "Take care of my daughter. I'm going to let her out because she's with you." I was innocent that my daughter was with this man, the mother said. The Ministry of Education provided support to the family and relatives of the deceased girl, as well as to the relatives of the other girls who were with Esmeralda on the day of the tragedy. In their message, they expressed their hope that cases of this nature will not be repeated in the education community and in society at large. With the pain of parents who can never come to terms with their daughter's death, they said, "It is their turn to fight for justice." A story that began as a fun evening outing with a visit to the beach turned into a night of terror that cost the life of student Esmeralda Riches, who bled to death after lacerations, abrasions, and bruises inflicted by a man whose parents are entrusted with the lives of their children. Obviously, everyone involved in the evening's outing has a share of blame. Unfortunately, because of her parents' excessive strictness, Esmeralda was afraid to ask them for help and tell them what had happened. Agree. Sometimes we think that it is easier to conceal for fear of punishment or just to remain misunderstood. But what a pity that in this battle fear wins, taking precious life. Malibu Creek State Park is a scenic recreation area 25 miles from downtown Los Angeles that has been used as a backdrop for popular movies and television shows. But when a young man was murdered in Malibu Creek while camping with his 2 daughters on a summer afternoon in 2018, it sent the Southern California community into hysterics. During the investigation, it became clear that this crime was connected to a string of unsolved incidents that had occurred earlier in the same area. This information spawned all sorts of universal conspiracy theories and public paranoia. Our story today is about what happens when lightning strikes in the most terrifying way imaginable. Let's begin. In the morning, police officers knocked on a young woman's house. She opened the door, and when she heard, "Are you Tristan Baudette's wife?" she knew the news would be sad, and she was not mistaken. 2 police officers informed the woman that her husband had been shot dead in his tent during the night. She left in a hurry to the place of tragedy because their daughters remained there. It was a long drive and tears spontaneously flowed from her eyes. Erica Wu was the fourth of 5 children in a family of immigrants from China. She lost her father early and saw how difficult it was for her mother to raise her children alone. Erica grew up a quiet and responsible child who keeps everything under control. When she met Tristan, he turned out to be the complete opposite of her. He didn't think too much and didn't worry about anything at all. He just did what he wanted to do. Tristan grew up in Fresno, California. His parents were natives of the area. His father sold insurance and his mother was a teacher. His parents divorced when he was only 3 years old. He was young, but old enough to remember it. Tristan and Erica met in high school. In the beginning, they were just acquaintances, but as time went on, their relationship grew closer. They spent a lot of time together, studied together, and shared their joys and sorrows with each other, despite being complete opposites of each other in personality. Soon something more grew out of their friendship, and they started dating. Erica went to Stanford University, and Tristan went to the University of California, San Diego. But they kept in touch, emailing every day, talking on the phone every night. They didn't see each other as often as they would have liked, but they found a way to stay together. In their second year of medical school, Erica and Tristan got engaged, and a year later, they decided to settle in San Francisco. In 2008, they were married in Tilden Park in front of all their friends and family, in a large rented room with glass walls and a stone clearing outside. After a year, Tristan and Erica moved to Long Beach in Southern California, and then to Irvine, where Erica began work at UCLA, and Tristan found a job with a large pharmaceutical company. It took them both a while to adjust to Orange County, but that's where they were truly happy. Their first daughter was born in 2014. Their second daughter was born 2 years later. Fatherhood made Tristan happy. He became a lark, waking up with the girls, making them breakfast and letting Erica rest. His passion continued to be hiking and camping. He took every opportunity to go to the woods or mountains as a family. He regularly took his daughters on hikes and bike rides. After completing her internship, Erica found a job in the San Francisco Bay Area, and the family began making plans to move back north. They found a house in a suburb south of San Francisco with all the necessary infrastructure nearby and a good school for their daughters. Tristan found a new job with a pharmaceutical company in the same neighborhood. They set a date to move at the end of June, a week after Erica was due to take her qualifying exam. Tristan and Erica's son-in-law, Scott, offered to pick up their daughters from home the night before so she could study for the exam in peace. On June 21st, 2018, Tristan had breakfast with Erica and their daughters and then packed up to go to his car. At the garage door, he hugged and kissed Erica, wished her good luck on the exam, and promised to celebrate with her when she returned the next day. Tristan, Scott, and the girls drove north to Malibu Creek State Park. They got there toward evening and were assigned a place to camp at the gate. When they arrived, Tristan looked around and decided that they could find a much better place. They surveyed the campground and found another spot that Tristan thought was perfect. They set up camp there, taking turns looking after the girls and setting up the tents. The day was full of excitement. The excitement of the trip to the park, the first impressions of setting up the tents and cooking over the fire had exhausted the girls, and as soon as it was dark, Tristan put them to bed. The men sat around the fire for a while longer and then dispersed to their tents, saying goodbye until morning. The night was quiet and dark. The sky was covered with clouds, and the moon did not illuminate the land. In the early morning hours of June 22nd, Scott awoke to a loud popping sound. The man got up to check where the sound was coming from, but it was followed by several more pops. He figured it was fireworks, but hearing a baby crying from Tristan's tent scared him and went to check it out. Cattle walked over to the tent and called out to Tristan several times, but he didn't respond, and the crying only got worse. He went inside and shined his flashlight into the tent. Scott was soothing the younger girl and kept calling Tristan's name. When he approached the man, he found him unconscious. Tristan was pale and unresponsive to light. No pulse was palpable. A pool of blood had formed next to Tristan's head. Scott tried to administer first aid to his friend, but it was too late. Tristan Baudet died at the scene. Scott called rangers who were working at the park and reported the incident. Around 4:40 a.m. on June 22, 2018, police received reports of a shooting at Malibu Creek State Park. Tristan and Erica's daughters were not touched by the shooter. One fatal bullet, like a bolt of lightning, struck Tristan in the head, who was killed instantly. The second bullet struck the torso of a man who was already dead. Bullet holes were visible in the tent. It looked as if some unknown person had fired a gun aimlessly into the tent at dawn, and the girls were miraculously unharmed. This fact gave the impression that the shooter did not care who he shot. Law enforcement officers quickly arrived at the scene of the tragedy and began interviewing vacationers who were in the park and could have seen the intruder. But, to the horror of the patrolmen, no one saw a man with a gun. Lengthy interviews with vacationers and park employees did not answer the investigators' questions. Since the investigation began, police have made almost no statements to witnesses. But later, one witness did come forward. A woman who was in a tent set up next to Tristan and Scott at the time of the attack admitted that she heard 5 shots in a row around 4:45 a.m. and wanted to call police immediately, but was very scared, thinking the shooter might be nearby and would shoot her too. After 20 minutes, she decided to leave the tent and called emergency services. Her call was the second call, as after the Rangers' call, rescuers were already on their way to Malibu Creek. While examining the scene, investigators noticed the caliber of the weapon was consistent with a hunting rifle, and such ammunition tends to retain killing power, meaning the bullet could have traveled quite a distance. A search was initiated for a location within that radius from where the shooting had originated. Detectives, with the help of service dogs, combed the area in and around the family tent with the assistance of police and forensics, but nothing suspicious was found to help solve the case. No arrests were made, and detectives were unable to provide any information about the suspect or his motives. Investigators were asking the same questions. Who could have shot the scientist, and where could the young father have made deadly enemies? Could it have been related to the industry in which he worked and conducted his research? Dr. Tristan Baudet was a research scientist who worked for a pharmaceutical company. Before his death, he questioned the safety of vaccines. He was working on safer vaccines, and his work did cause controversy in pharmaceutical industry circles. But this version of premeditated murder because of Tristan's research has remained unproven. Interviews with numerous witnesses continued, and after checking many facts, it became obvious that the murder of Tristan Baudet was no accident. This attack was the 6th. Moreover, 2 of them had been carried out on the very tent camp that Tristan and Scott had used. This led to serious concerns that a sniper was on the loose. Malibu Creek Park was closed to the public. The public was outraged at the irresponsibility of the authorities who had not given serious consideration to the earlier attacks in the park, because they were not fatal. Tourists were outraged by the news. It turned out that such a popular place is an area that is periodically shelled by some intruder. After the first cases with injuries, no one closed the park or investigated it. Tourists were not notified of the incidents. In fact, the police wrote off every incident in the park as hunter-related accidents. After Tristan's murder, the park was still closed, and the public arrived in shock at the carelessness of the security services. The safety of park visitors is more important to us than anything else, city officials said, and soon closed Malibu Creek Park. However, the neighborhood did not become less dangerous for locals after the park's closure. Police officers received complaints of gunfire in that area about 9 times. The search for the perpetrator continued, but there wasn't much evidence at the scene. Authorities confirmed that none of the campers saw anyone entering the campground at the time. It became apparent that the shooter was inhabiting the park. The family of Tristan Baudet, who died on June 22nd, has expressed condolences to the relatives of the victims and has chosen to remain in the shadows from all the hype that has been stirred up by the public. Using the last chance to get information about the shooter, authorities offered a $30,000 reward for any information about the crimes. But despite the reward offered for information about the possible perpetrator, the motive and the perpetrator remained unknown for months. Investigators had no choice but to begin unraveling the tangle of mysterious gunshots. because the death of a young father, Tristan Baudet, fit into a series of violent crimes that occurred in those places in recent years. The roots of this tangled story go back to November 2016. The first incident happened to biologist James Rogers. He went to Malibu Creek Park for a camping trip, set up camp, and fell asleep in a hammock. He was awakened by a searing pain in his right arm. The man thought he had been bitten by some rodent or bat and went to the hospital. The doctors gave him a rabies vaccination and sent him home. As his arm began to heal, he noticed pieces of metal in the wound that looked like gunshot. The second incident occurred in January 2017 when Melissa Tatangelo and her lover parked their car in the parking lot of the same Malibu Creek Park and fell asleep. In the middle of the night, they heard a loud gunshot and the smell of burnt metal. In the morning, they discovered a hole in the back of the car from a shotgun blast. Locals were whispering perhaps a dangerous criminal with a firearm was walking around in their neighborhood. But at the time, police attention was not drawn to these episodes. In the summer of 2018, people began to recall other scary incidents from years past. There was talk that in 2009, 24-year-old Matrice Richardson went missing in the remote hills of California. Almost a year later, her remains were found a few miles from a railroad station. In 2017, 20-year-old Elaine Park went missing. She was last seen in the California town of Calabasas. A few days later, her car with her personal belongings was found on the side of the road along the Pacific coast in Malibu. The American woman's body was never found. A month before the latest crime, which took place in a tent in Malibu Creek Park, another mutilated corpse with signs of violence appeared. The deceased was lying in a tent across the street from the park. Investigators confronted with the string of attacks labeled Malibu Creek Park as a dumping ground for the bodies. At first, the crimes seemed to have no other connection, but as the investigation progressed, new details began to emerge. The driver of a Tesla electric car, who has remained anonymous, said that 4 days before Tristan Baudet was killed, around 4:30 a.m., someone fired shots at his car. However, Los Angeles detectives have never been able to prove that the crimes are all connected. The townspeople discussed the possible motives of the perpetrator in fear and advised each other not to leave doors and windows open. Locals refused to believe that a serial criminal had taken up residence in such a beautiful area where a celebrity could be found on every corner. Some speculated that the man's death could have been a ridiculous accident when someone was once again practicing shooting. Perhaps Tristan Baudet was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Did the man's death have a connection to the missing women and the mutilated bodies of vacationers? But unfortunately, police had no leads they could tell the town's terrified residents about. In August, investigators held a meeting and officially admitted that the investigation had reached a dead end. In desperation, people speculated. Perhaps he was killed because of a particularly valuable and secret project Tristan was working on, or perhaps his death was connected to the drug cartels and illegal drugs he was allegedly growing in remote corners of the park. The only thing to do was to wait, because if there is a criminal, he is sure to leave a trace, and so it was. In addition to violent crimes, near Malibu Creek Park, someone stole food and broke into abandoned buildings. The criminal was repeatedly caught on hidden cameras. He was followed, but the sinister bandit could not be apprehended. A sketch of the burglar has been compiled. Amidst the minor offenses, gunshots continued to ring out in the hills. About the same time, a park employee was driving through Malibu Creek and saw a man on the side of the road who asked for a ride. The stranger's face resembled a sketch of a suspected thief, so the driver turned him down. Instead, he reported the incident to police officers. Patrolmen in 3 helicopters combed the park area until dusk, to no avail. Then another attack on the community center occurred. The perpetrator broke a glass window and vandalized a vending machine in search of food. Police officers immediately responded to the call and tracked down the bandit from fresh shoe prints. A 42-year-old man named Anthony Rowder, dressed in all black, was apprehended. A rifle was found in his backpack. According to unofficial reports, the intruder was homeless and had been stealing food to survive. One of his relatives stated that Anthony had been arrested twice in the past 4 months. He was initially detained for illegal border crossing but was soon released. The relative also added that Anthony Rowder had been living in that neighborhood for 10 years and was afraid of the people around him. On October 10, 2018, nearly 4 months after the murder of Tristan Baudet, alleged perpetrator Anthony Rowder was taken into custody in a canyon near the park with a rifle in his backpack. Sheriff's authorities described him as a survivalist outdoorsman. He was first arrested in connection with several thefts in the area and later charged with the murder of Tristan Baudet and involvement in other shootings. Anthony Rowder had previously served time in state prison for possession of explosives and then for possession of a loaded handgun, which is illegal for people convicted of felonies. He was on probation at the time of his arrest, authorities said, during the investigation of Tristan Baudet and before Anthony Rowder's arrest. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department said there had been at least 7 other unsolved shootings in the area since November 2016. In early January 2023, state authorities did indict Anthony Rowder for all the shootings recorded in the Malibu Creek area in recent years. In total, he had to answer for 10 attempted murders, 5 burglaries, and the crime against Tristan Baudet. Police seemed to have found a scapegoat and were ready to close all the cases by pinning them on one man. Authorities believe the suspect was also involved in other unsolved crimes committed nearly 10 years ago. This 10-year blood fever would make for a Hollywood movie, said one of the detectives who worked on the case. Indeed, the whole story is like the script of a new blockbuster movie, but in 2 parts, where in the second part, the real culprit of the crime will still be found. Anthony Rowder was charged with murder, 10 counts of attempted murder, and 5 counts of second-degree burglary. Detectives said the charges were based on a comparison of bullets found at the scene of Tristan's death and other locations where gunfire was heard. His case has been postponed until he can find representation, according to the report. There were also questions about Anthony's ability to stand trial. For a long time, he remained in custody and insisted on his innocence. In November 2018, Anthony Rowder did appear in court. However, at the first hearing, the man had to be removed from the hall as the defendant began to shout, use profanity, and bang on the walls of his cell. When the bailiffs removed him, he demanded the dismissal of his court-appointed lawyer. Locals cherished the hope that Tristan Baudet's killer had finally been found, but the gunshots in the middle of the night in Malibu Creek never stopped. A jury found Anthony Rowder guilty of 1 count of attempted murder and 1 count of shooting at a vehicle 4 days before Tristan Baudet's death. The jury acquitted Anthony Rowder of the first-degree murder charge, but found him guilty of second-degree murder. He faced 40 years to life in prison. A statement from the district attorney's office said a Los Angeles County Superior Court judge sentenced 46-year-old Anthony Rowder to 119 years in prison. But was the man punished by state law? Could Anthony Rowder have been so disturbed to have fired indiscriminate shots at people in the mountains over the past few years? There seemed to be evidence to suggest so. What about the gunshots that people continued to hear at night, even after the suspect was arrested? A local Malibu journalist, who was skeptical from the start, continues to doubt the state's version of events. Personally, I think the shooter is still out there somewhere, she says. There's something convenient about pursuing a burglary suspect, she says, perhaps a result of the political events following Tristan's death. Everything that's happened is 1,000,000% coincidence, Erica Wu believes. Tristan was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Of course, I'm also wondering, why did this happen to us? Who's to blame? In late December 2018, Erica Wu, the wife of the deceased Tristan Baudet, filed a complaint against authorities in Los Angeles and California. She complained against law enforcers for failing to warn locals about the dangers of recreation in Malibu Creek Park, despite a series of deaths. The woman demanded $90 million in compensation. Police acknowledged the lawsuit but declined to comment. Nevertheless, the question remains, could what happened to Tristan Baudet have been prevented? Obviously, the motive for the crime was never established. Serial criminals usually memorize everything keep trophies, or leave distinctive footprints. But Anthony was so disorganized, so unpredictable, it's a miracle he was identified at all. So some social outcast was blindly taking revenge on all people, shooting whoever God sent, venting his anger for no particular purpose. He didn't even know if his victims were killed or if they even existed. Most likely, this story of the Malibu Creek shooter will have a sequel after all, and we hope that it will end with the real criminal being punished and no new victims appearing. Think of a scene from any movie in which the protagonist is running away from pursuit, but in the last seconds, when he is already safe, the villain's foot stops the closing door and the protagonist turns into a vulnerable victim. A young woman's morning began like this scene. She found herself trapped. We all know that in a state, law must always prevail. Not religion, not tradition, but the defense of human rights and freedom. However, some attitudes formed many years ago and stereotypes from childhood, imposed by society, affect the woman, and under the influence of unspoken rules, she continues to live with a tyrant and tolerates violence. Today, our reality is such that even in the modern world, these attitudes are still relevant and continue to change people's lives. Today, we will move to Central Asia, namely to Kyrgyzstan, and look at the customs and lives of people of the state with the oldest history. Kyrgyzstan is a country rich in natural beauty. After all, 3/4 of the country are mountains. Almost all of its territory is located within 2 mountain systems. The overwhelming majority of believers in Kyrgyzstan are Muslims. There are Christians, Orthodox, Catholics, and various Protestant movements. At the same time, Kyrgyzstan is a secular state. It is a state with a system where religion is separated from state power and which is regulated on the basis of civil rather than religious norms. The country's authorities punish members of the clergy for performing religious rituals that contradict the laws of the republic. But in the case of one fragile young woman who begged for help from the state and asked for protection, the authorities showed complete indifference. Asel Nogobayeva was born in 1986 in the city of Tokmak, Chue Oblast, Kyrgyzstan. After finishing school, the girl finished hairdressing courses and moved to Bishkek to find a job in a salon. It is easy to get lost in a large city, but sometimes it is much easier to meet people there. One day, Azamat Estebesov came to the hairdresser's shop where Asel worked to get a new haircut. He liked the pretty slender girl very much, and he invited her for a cup of fragrant coffee. The meeting became fateful for both of them. After all, Azamat also liked Asel very much. He seemed to be a simple, attentive man who was brought up in a prosperous family and was very hardworking. Asel's family approved of her daughter's choice because Azamat was very religious and honored Muslim traditions. Asel's parents did not see the disadvantages of the groom and with a calm heart blessed the marriage. At the age of 19, Asel married her beloved Azamat. Soon the firstborn child was born in the young family. A boy. It would seem that every man dreams of an heir, of someone who will continue the family. But in our story, the joy of fatherhood, as if a genie from a jug caused the lowly and cruel demons of Azamat. So, on an ordinary evening, a simple family story turned into a real drama, which provoked a whole series of sad events. Asel and Azamat were bathing their son. The inexperienced father accidentally poured too much water on the child. He shook with fright and cried a lot. Asel reacted rudely and shouted at her husband. Azamat did not hesitate to hit her in the face in response. That same evening, Asel and the child went to her mother's house. Azamat repented and asked for forgiveness. He begged and said that this would never happen again. It is worth noting that the Kyrgyz mentality is very different from other mentalities. From childhood, girls are taught patience. A husband should be alone for the rest of his life because divorce is not welcomed, although it is not forbidden. And the Muslim religion plays an important role in creating and preserving a family by any means. Knowing the traditions and customs of the Turkic family, Asel, who herself grew up without a father, did not want her son to repeat her fate. The girl believed that Azamat raised his hand for the first and last time, and they would be able to continue living happily. Asel came back, but she was mistaken. A year later, the family returned from Bishkek to her native Tokmak to live near her parents. The return was joyful. because Asel was expecting her second child. Asel was walking with her son on the playground near her home and met several classmates. They said hello and had a nice conversation. However, returning home from the walk, Asel again received a strong blow to the face. The blow was so strong that she fell and slipped on the linoleum. Unfortunately, this blow and fall triggered a miscarriage. After moving to Tokmak, Azamat became Asel's shadow. He stealthily followed her on the street. He was constantly looking for a reason for new conflicts. The man got a taste for it and could no longer refrain from beating her. Only his outer shell remained of the kind and attentive Azamat, although Asel had changed because his gaze was filled with anger and hatred. Asel has resigned herself to living under total control for the sake of her children. After all, she had another son again. The beatings did not stop for years. Asel's mother, knowing about her daughter's family drama, could not stand it and took her to her home. But the man did not stop. He came again and again for his family and begged for forgiveness, promising that this would not happen again. Tradition intervened again because in Kyrgyzstan, a son must grow up with his father. Such are the rules. Asel ended up going back 5 times. Life became a nightmare for Asel and she was tired of enduring it. After each day of painful beatings, she went to the police in the hope of getting help. But there is no criminal sentence for domestic violence in Kyrgyzstan. The maximum that was applied to Azamat was 3 days in the isolation center. Then he came back again, and this nightmare continued over and over again for 6 years. Azamat did not even want to hear about divorce. He threatened that if his wife filed for divorce, he would find her, the children and her family, and kill them all. During the period of the worst beatings, Asel's family took her to Italy. In Italy, Asel had big plans. She settled in with her brother, who helped her find a job. She worked 3 jobs, a nurse, a cleaner, and she walked dogs. The woman worked without weekends to save money for an apartment, to become financially independent, and to leave her tyrant husband. After 3.5 years, she had already saved enough money to buy an apartment and open a mini business. During the years in Italy, Asel saw a lot of new things. She communicated with interesting people, and gradually her moral state recovered. But her maternal heart ached for her children. After all, she had to leave them for long 3 years, for the sake that they had a bright future ahead of them. The woman knew that the father never beat the children and did not show aggression towards them, so she was calm about it. But when she returned from Italy, a bleak picture awaited her. The children were living in terrible conditions. In one small room they slept, ate, played, and even went to the bathroom. The children did not go to school or for walks. They didn't eat well. And again, tradition. Azamat raised real Turkic men and created truly harsh conditions for their existence. Instead of school, they attended a madrasa, a Muslim religious and educational institution where they learn religion and how to read the Quran. Asel took the children. Azamat did not mind. It would seem that she was saved from the cruel captivity, but Azamat began to pursue his Asel again. He called and offered to meet her. Asel was categorical and made it clear that in case of harassment she would file a police report. But this did not stop him. In the evening, Asel went to the store to get some dishwashing detergent. The store was very close by. On her way, she met Azamat, who was following her again. He grabbed her and threatened her with a knife and took her to a dark, remote place. There, right on the street, he brutally beat Asel and took advantage of her. The strange sounds were noticed by passers-by who called the police. On September 1st, 2022, Asel wrote a statement to the police on her ex-husband about rape. He was detained and a criminal case was opened. Asel's family was sure that he would go to trial and the torment for all of them would end. But no. Azamat's family became active and could not accept that their son was a tyrant. Azamat's mother and sisters repeatedly begged Asel to withdraw the application. Another strange tradition. A woman in Kyrgyzstan cannot report her husband because it is a great shame. To beat, humiliate, and rape a woman is not shameful. Azamat's relatives discouraged Asel as much as they could. By deception, they succeeded. Asel took back the application in exchange for Azamat's application for relinquishment of parental rights. But he is still officially their father. The Sokoluk District Court dismissed the case because of the victim's counter-application and reconciliation of the parties. After being released, Azamat started a new wave of harassment and threats. He wrote daily threatening messages to Asel, changed phone numbers to relentlessly continue his pressure. He openly said in voice messages that if he caught Asel, he would kill her. He waited for her in the driveway. He waited for her at work. He followed her everywhere. For 3 months, Asel's relatives took turns living with her and her children, protecting her from Azamat's attacks. But this did not save the woman from the second violence. On January 31st, 2023, the woman went to the police again and reported that her ex-husband had again taken advantage of her by using force. A criminal case was also opened and the suspect was detained. After the investigation, the materials were sent to the court. The family was waiting for the decision and expected a real term of at least 5 years. On the day when the trial was to take place, the judge and 2 prosecutors invited Asel to a separate office. Azamat was there. In front of her eyes, they took off his handcuffs, informing him that they applied 3 years of probation instead of 5 years of imprisonment. In fact, he remained free. The court considered such a decision appropriate because Azamat has an elderly mother with a disability and 2 children from his marriage to the victim. Let me clarify that probation is a set of measures applied to convicted persons. The purpose of probation is to correct behavior and prevent the commission of new crimes. Asel was crying. She felt herself driven into the darkest corner from which there was no escape. Despair and fear once again confidently settled in the woman's life. But Asel did not wait for new attacks. She no longer believed anyone and did not listen to Azamat's relatives. Asel took down all the beatings. She hired a lawyer and filed an appeal with the Chue Regional Court. The lawyers provided the court with all the threats in the messages, all the voice messages, and this time, the case went to court. But a series of different events constantly postponed the hearing, bringing closer the worst day of Asel. First, the lawyer fell ill, and the trial was postponed for a month. The second and third hearings were also postponed for inexplicable reasons. At the 4th hearing, Asel begged not to postpone the hearing any longer because she was afraid not of beatings, but of death. Azamat continued to walk around freely and make attempts on Asel's life. On the eve of the meeting, he sent her a photo of a black backpack with a knife and a rope, with the caption, "I am ready to meet you," at the bottom. But due to Azamat's refusal of the state lawyer and the involvement of a private lawyer in the case was again postponed indefinitely. With such indifference of justice and law enforcement agencies, Asel simply had no chance to save herself. September 20th, 2023 began as usual. At 6:30 a.m., Asel woke up her children. They had breakfast together, and the caring mother accompanied her eldest son to school, wishing him a good day. Asel was about to leave the house too, so she didn't close the door, finishing getting ready. She brushed her hair as the front door suddenly opened. Azamat came in very quickly and very aggressively. The woman did not have time to react and close herself in the bathroom. He immediately hit her twice on the head, after which Asel fell into a stupor of incomprehension about what was happening. After the blows on her head, the pervert grabbed her by the throat and started strangling her. Asel lost consciousness. Nothing further. Asel lay unconscious. Sometimes she heard Azamat's voice, and it seemed to her that everything that was happening was a terrible dream. But the strong crying of her son brought her back to reality. Asel realized that she was awake. The boy covered himself with a blanket and crying repeated, "Daddy, don't do it." But his father ordered to keep silent, otherwise he would slaughter him too. Asel did not remember how from the bathroom, where she tried to hide, she found herself in the kitchen. He threw the unfortunate woman to the floor like an unnecessary thing, then picked her up again and continued to abuse her. In a moment, the pervert had lifted Asel up again and leaned her against the wall and was stabbing her face and neck with a clerical knife in cold blood. The next time Asel regained consciousness, she looked around and saw that everything was covered in blood, but she didn't realize what was happening. She had lost a lot of blood and her throat was dry. She kept asking for a drink. Her once beloved husband brought her a bucket of rags, and in it was water mixed with blood. The giver had gotten so into the taste of blood that he started picking out a knife. He went through all the kitchen knives and tried them on, choosing the one that would reach Asel's heart. But suddenly the door opened, and police officers entered the house. It turned out that a neighbor from downstairs heard the screams, and knowing about the difficult situation of Asel and her ex-husband, called the police, which saved her life by stopping the horrible torture. Azamat Estebesov resisted and attacked the officers with a knife. In such turmoil, no one realized what had happened. The whole apartment was drenched in blood. Azamat started cutting Asel in the bathroom, then dragged her to the kitchen through the hallway. He cut off his ex-wife's nose and ears and inflicted multiple wounds on her face and neck. He cut her throat, slashed her face, and beat her very badly. The district police officers arrived and called an ambulance. After assessing Asel's appearance, they began to look for the cut organs in a hurry, but they were nowhere to be found. Would you be surprised to know where they found the woman's ears and nose? In the monster's pocket. In pursuit of lost time, the police officers took Asel by their car to the 4th City Hospital in Bishkek. But there they did not provide her with first aid, explaining that according to her propiska, she did not belong to their hospital. Not only the doctors did not provide the victim with first aid, but they did not even stop the bleeding. Only in the 2nd hospital, she received first aid and stopped bleeding. She was then sent to the National Hospital, where she was operated on for 9 hours. 6 doctors worked meticulously to restore Asel's face. The found amputated organs were carefully delivered by the district police officers. The doctors meticulously collected everything, as the earlobes and nerve nodes were completely severed. Azamat did it with a special knife. It was very delicate work. The nose was also completely cut off. In the hospital, Asel did not regain consciousness for a long time. She miraculously survived. Psychologists warned that recovery would be long, and it would be very dangerous. The young, beautiful woman was disfigured. A criminal case under the article, "Causing Grave Harm to Health" of the Criminal Code of the Kyrgyz Republic, was initiated on the fact of the attack. The police detained the suspect in the commission of the crime. He was sent to a pre-trial detention center. On September 27, 2023, the sentence against Azamat Estebesov was changed to 8 years of imprisonment. By presidential decree, 9 judges were dismissed from their posts. Among them is the judge of Sokolok District Court of Choi Region Kielbek Toktomamatov, who released the man under probation supervision. The decree of the head of state says that Toktomamatov was dismissed in connection with the violation of the requirements of impeccable behavior of a judge. In addition to him, Sadir Japarov, by decree of November 1st, at the suggestion of the Council of Judges, prematurely terminated the powers of a number of judges who in one way or another violated the requirements of impeccability. 6 investigators were involved in further investigation of the incident. They brought up all the previous cases of Azamat Estebesov and studied them again. They took into account all the facts they found, and on them in the new indictment case, there were already 11 articles. At the end of December 2023, all investigative activities were completed, and on January 9, 2024, the first court hearings began. Azamat Estebesov did not admit guilt on any of the 11 episodes charged against him. He avoided answering the judge's questions in every possible way, and in some cases stated that he was possessed by a demon, so he could not speak. He behaved aggressively towards the witnesses, because of which the trial was postponed. On January 26, 2024, the final closed court session was held. Judge Taalaykul Tadirkulova, taking into account all the details of such a complex case, sentenced Azamat Estebesov to 20 years of imprisonment without the right to apply probation. He must also pay 2 million sums to his ex-wife and a fine of 80,000 sums to the state. The judge decided to count 1 day spent in pre-trial detention center for 2. In spring, the defendant filed an appeal, but the sentence of 20 years imprisonment remained unchanged. Asel Nogoybayeva noted that she would go further and demand that the former spouse be sentenced to life imprisonment, and all those involved in encouraging his actions be publicly removed from office and punished. Let this be an example to everyone. I want no woman in Kyrgyzstan to endure the pain that I and my family are carrying. Thank you all who do not stand by," the victim concluded. Asel Nogoybayeva's family and activists asked that her ex-husband be given a life sentence. After all, despite the imprisonment, Azamat continued to text threats to Asel with a warning that he would still go out and find her. The case of Asel Nogoybayeva, about the powerlessness of a woman before the law of the country, and how a once loved and loving person turns into a cold-blooded monster in an instant, has finally come to its conclusion under the law. This case caused a wide public resonance throughout Kyrgyzstan. Asel's sister, Diana Yelkin, appealed to MPs to pass a law on domestic violence. She said that if the MPs do not pass a law on domestic violence, she will make them look at Asel's face without bandages and think what one wrong decision is worth. Asel's sister published a petition asking for a life sentence without parole for her sister's ex-husband. She recalled that her sister divorced her husband 5 years ago because of beatings and inadequate behavior of her spouse, but he did not leave her alone even after the divorce, stalking, beating, and abusing her. Azamat Estebesov is a dangerous person for society. People like him should not live free. They are obsessive and manic people. People like him should be behind bars. We ask for a life sentence for this monster. He has already killed Asel morally. He mutilated her face in front of her young son. People like him should be sentenced for life without the right to parole. She appeals in the petition. It doesn't matter what country it happened in. Family violence often takes monstrous forms. The topic of domestic violence should unite all women of the world. And we should not forget that religion is not an indicator that a person is adequate. Now Asel has a new life. Her new identity brings her great suffering. Despite the fact that Asel's wounds are gradually healing, full recovery of hearing and breathing functions will be long. In her interview, Asel told how she saw her face for the first time after the tragedy. There were no mirrors in my room, since I was not allowed to look at myself. It was a day off. My doctors were not there along with the doctor on duty, so I went to the first floor for dressing. I had my bandages removed and there was a metal operating lamp. The doctor on duty had not put it away. I saw myself in the reflection. I'm afraid of myself. I can't look at myself in the mirror. I could already see my ears. From the shock, I lost consciousness. 2 weeks later, Asel saw her face completely. Her brother gave her a dressing at home. All the mirrors in the house were removed in advance, except for one mirror in the bathroom, because it could not be removed. When her brother left for 3 seconds, Asel quickly stood up and decided to look at herself. After seeing her reflection, she fainted. She had a very strong hysteria. Asel said that no one should ever see such ugliness. But the restoration of Asel's face is still ahead of her. Before the plastic surgery, she will have several operations to reconstruct her face, restore the frame of her ears and nose. These are surgeries that require long preparation, skin augmentation, and a long recovery period of at least a year. Also, Asel has lost her hearing by 20%, which will definitely be corrected as well. The difficulty is that these operations are not performed in Kyrgyzstan. Such complex operations are carried out in Turkey or in other countries, and this requires very large funds. Mikhail Surer, a plastic surgeon from Turkey, offered to perform the surgery free of charge, that is to cover all the costs. At first, Kyrgyz doctors told him that Asel had only the tip of her nose, but when Surer saw the woman's face without bandages, he was extremely shocked. It turned out that plastic surgery alone would not do the trick in this case. First, a whole series of operations to restore organs was needed. The surgery to restore the ears and nose of Asel Nogoybayeva, who was mutilated by her ex-husband, will cost at least $45,000. Asel's sister, Diana Yelkin, who is actively engaged in disseminating information and raising funds for the operation, noted that all complex operations will be carried out in Turkey. Unfortunately, we have not raised even half of the needed $45,000. In addition, there are other expenses for accommodation, psychologist, rehabilitation, interpreter, medicines, and so on, Diana Yelkin said. I have more pictures of her without bandages. They are very scary. They are not for the faint of heart. I have been unable to come to my senses since yesterday, and I can't accept this face because there is nothing left of her ears and nose. Thank you to the doctors. They did everything they could. The main thing is that sepsis and gangrene did not go, said the sister of the victim. Diana Yelkin notes that if they cannot raise the necessary amount of money in the near future, she will publish her sister's face without bandages. Let the whole world see the true face of lawlessness, the true face of a victim of violence. Let every judge, policeman, deputy hang a picture of the mutilated Asel and look at her photo before making the necessary decisions, laws. If a year ago the judge had not given probation to this monster, all this would not have happened. The family and Asel were hoping for the law, for independent judges. Now we are making a challenge to everyone, a challenge to the judiciary of Kyrgyzstan. Diana regularly organized events to draw the attention of the Kyrgyz public to the problem of domestic violence against women. So far, fundraising has been held to help restore Asel Nogoybayeva's health. Asel's support, despite the terrible ordeal she endured, is an example of courage and determination in the fight against violence. Asel, who herself has yet to recover mentally and physically from 12 years of beatings, dreams of opening a foundation to help women who have also been abused like herself. After being abused, you can't stop helping others. To conclude the story, the real ugliness that no one should see is not Asel's face at all, but the essence of her ex-husband. Even with fatigue and pain in her eyes, one can see that Asel is a very feminine, gentle, and beautiful woman. It does not matter how her face looks now. She is a beautiful woman, because her soul and heart are beautiful. I would like to appeal to all women. Never tolerate and do not expect your chosen one to change, run away, and never come back. All nations have tyrants. A wedding is one of the most eagerly anticipated and heartfelt events in every woman's life. But not all dreams of happiness end with the fairy tale ending of they lived happily ever after and died on the same day. Today we find ourselves in Somerset, England. This part of southwest England is famous for its well-preserved medieval castles, ancient towns, and legends of King Arthur. But these aren't the only legends that shroud the modern county. On the morning of September 12, 2012, a local resident named Orlando was rushing home after a long night shift at a gas station. He had promised his wife he would take their little daughter Maria to daycare. Loud music played in the car to keep him awake as trees along the road swiftly passed by one after another. Coming out of a sharp turn, he saw black smoke. Orlando slowed down. Smoke was billowing from a nearby parking lot where a car was engulfed in flames. Orlando stopped, ran to take a closer look but couldn't get close because of the fire. 4 minutes later, when the firefighters arrived at the scene, the car was completely burnt out. The arriving police cordoned off the area with safety tape to keep the gathering onlookers at a distance. The place was quite deserted so early in the morning, and there were no witnesses nearby who could describe the incident's exact moment. Upon examining the scene, a charred body was discovered. The police had to identify the victim and determine the causes of this dreadful death. There were no signs of a car accident or skid marks found nearby. Likewise, no tire tread marks from another vehicle were found. A car self-ignition or spontaneous combustion due to malfunctions became the police's initial theory. A lengthy investigation and multiple expert analyses were ahead. The remains were transported to the forensic laboratory to determine the identity and cause of death of the deceased. Fragments of the burned vehicle were also delivered to the forensic laboratory to identify any malfunctions and establish the cause of the fire. The police began their investigation by checking the missing persons database and recent reports of disappearances. Forensic experts quickly identified the deceased. She was a 23-year-old local resident, Katherine Wells Barr. On the same day, a report of a missing person was filed by Raphael Novak concerning the disappearance of the young woman. According to Raphael Novak's report, he left for work at 5:30 a.m., while his girlfriend, Katherine, was still sleeping soundly at home. Although they worked for the same company, his shift started 2 hours earlier. When Katherine did not show up for work after this time, and Raphael couldn't find her at any of her relatives, he contacted the police. The investigation commenced. The police interviewed the victim's parents and sister, as well as Raphael Novak, who reported her missing, and all her colleagues and friends. Gradually, by piecing together information about the last days and subsequently the years of the young woman's life, they managed to reconstruct a sequence of events that led to her tragic demise. Katherine Wells Barr was born in 1989 to Phil and Jane Wells Barr in the United Kingdom. She was the second child in her family, with an older sister named Lynn. During the summer of 2010, while on a university break, Katherine met one of the employees, 31-year-old Rafal Novak, on a new vacuum cleaner production line. The tall, ruggedly handsome blonde quickly caught Katherine's eye. He was an immigrant from Poland, with a former wife and son back home. About 4 years prior, he had moved to England in search of a better life. Katherine and Rafal soon started dating. Initially, they met for lunch at the cafe on the production site, but these lunches quickly turned into romantic dinners. Rafal courted Katherine beautifully, gifting her lovely bouquets, taking her to movies, and going for walks. Rafal opened up to Katherine, sharing his past life and reasons for moving to the UK. Katherine's trusting heart let the blonde man in completely. Their relationship progressed so swiftly that within a few months, Katherine introduced Rafal to her parents. They joyfully welcomed their daughter's choice into the family, hopeful for the couple's future happiness. Soon, the lovers were planning their wedding. In 2011, Katherine graduated with honors from Bath Spa University and landed a promising job as a business analyst at Pneumatic International, the company that manufactures Henry vacuum cleaners. She quickly advanced in her career, providing good job opportunities for her parents and sister. Katherine was intelligent and well-educated. She always knew how to approach people, was concerned with her colleagues' problems, and was very attentive to those around her. Her kind gaze and radiant smile endeared her to people who held the young leader in high regard. Katherine Wells Barr's career was on a fast track to success. Her substantial earnings, combined with those of her partner, Rafal Novak, allowed them to purchase a spacious home with a terrace in Willow Way. Despite their financial well-being, the house was bought on a mortgage, for which the young couple secured insurance coverage as per their agreement with the bank. Youth, successful careers, and love. It seemed they had everything needed for happiness. Yet, the fateful day of September 12, 2012, marked a dividing line in their lives, changing everything from before to after. The investigation pressed on, uncovering new and unfamiliar facts about the lives of Katherine and Rafal. Over time, the veil of deceit that had enveloped their relationship from the start began to lift. 29-year-old Rafal Novak left behind a wife and child in Poland, fleeing to escape significant debts. He relocated to the UK, where he met Anna Lagvinovich. Since 2008, they maintained a close relationship. Then Katherine came into the picture. For a while, Rafal saw both women, but ultimately, he chose Katherine Wells Barr, seeing her as a more viable option for a family and financial stability. While Katherine genuinely dreamed of a happy marriage with the man she loved and starting a family, Novak was plotting a scheme to end her life, intending to leave himself and his mistress, Anna Lagvinovich, with the life insurance payout and the large house, a significant portion of the funds for which had been contributed by Katherine. The plot of this crime was meticulously planned and executed with even greater cruelty and cold-bloodedness. On the day of her disappearance, after waiting a few hours, Rafal approached Katherine's boss to inquire about her whereabouts. He feigned sincere panic and despair in front of Katherine's colleagues and relatives. Katherine was not found at her parents' home, nor at her own. Her car was missing as well. Rafal recalled that she had been receiving threatening letters from a certain mentally unstable admirer for some time. Following this, her family contacted the police. The family was in the living room of the young couple's house, awaiting her return, when they were informed that a burning car with a body inside had been found. Rafal mentioned that the evening before her disappearance was entirely normal. The couple had gone for a walk after work, stopped by a store for groceries, had dinner, and then went to bed together after watching some television. Katherine did not appear scared or disturbed. However, a more detailed investigation proved that her death occurred earlier. Katherine was strangled around 2 a.m., likely in her own bed while she was sleeping. Her lifeless body was then placed in the car, taken a short distance from the house, and callously set on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence. Yet Rafael Novak had a solid alibi. He was at work from 5:30 a.m., and according to him, Katherine was asleep in bed when he left. The burning car was discovered between 6 and 7 a.m. However, Rafael was still at home at 1:30 a.m., significantly altering the case's direction. Thus, Rafael Novak became the prime suspect in the murder of Katherine Wells Barr. Evidence allowed for Novak to be detained pending further investigation. Rafael claimed that Katherine was being pursued by a stalker who had repeatedly written to her and driven her to hysteria. During the investigation, it was revealed that Katherine indeed had accounts on several adult websites, indicating a hidden side of her life unknown to her close ones. Intimate photos and flirtatious exchanges with men were found, along with a letter from a secret admirer. However, no matter how long you try to twist the truth, it always comes to light. In an attempt to mislead the investigation and direct it towards a false trail, Rafael forgot to destroy the evidence proving his direct involvement in Katherine's demise. Importantly, this provided the prosecution with a motive. Upon examining Novak's phone, investigators discovered that he never ceased communication and meetings with Anna Lagvinovich. They actively met over the last few months. Additionally, it was found that the man had a financial interest as well, as shortly before Katherine's demise, they both insured their lives for a sum of £123,000. Katherine and Rafael were the sole beneficiaries of the insurance contracts and recipients of the payouts for each other. The receipt of a substantial life insurance sum emerged as the primary motive in the case regarding Katherine's demise and the arson of her car to confuse the investigation. Police discovered that on the day of her disappearance, Katherine sent a message to Anna Lagvinovich's phone. Also, surveillance cameras revealed that a few days before the crime, Anna, along with a relative, her uncle, filled a full canister of gasoline at a gas station. Thus, a third party became involved in the case. 32-year-old Anna Lagvinovich and her 38-year-old uncle Tadeusz Dmitryshin became suspects in the complicity of intentional crime and arson to conceal evidence. The crime was meticulously planned over several months by the trio. They prepared thoroughly for the act, creating accounts on pornographic websites, uploading photoshopped images of Katherine, and fabricating and saving exchanges with various men, all to lead the investigation astray with a false trail. They didn't resist the irrefutable evidence for long. When Rafael and Anna realized it was futile to deny any longer, they started blaming each other. The man insisted that Anna, out of jealousy, devised and executed the plan to eliminate a rival. In contrast, she accused Novak of committing the crime out of greed, aiming to secure the insurance payout in the house. In an attempt to avoid exposure, the conspirators wove a web of heartless lies around an honest and joyful young woman. They posted her fake profiles on websites used by people looking for casual, intimate encounters. The conspirators went to great lengths to conceal their crime, not only setting her body ablaze but also fabricating a completely false backstory for her. They aimed to portray Katherine as a promiscuous woman, full of secrets and desires. They convincingly created the image of a mysterious lover who could have ended her life. One of the conspirators sent a text message from Wells Barr's phone at 5:17 a.m. on the day of her demise to this fictitious man, suggesting she was headed to meet him. However, forensic experts determined that when the fire started in the car, Katherine was wearing only her favorite nightgown, not the outfit she would have chosen for a meeting with a man. They discovered a pillow was missing from her bed, and the only pillowcase had been washed and was hanging on a clothesline, leaving the police to believe she was suffocated. In Anna Lagvinovich's car, detectives found a SIM card linked to the number Katherine was supposed to have texted that morning. In Lagvinovich's apartment trash bin, they found notes she had written, seeking inspiration for messages supposedly sent by the mysterious person. As soon as Novak and Lagvinovich realized the game was up, they both claimed that Katherine's demise was the act of a hired criminal. A week before the trial began, Lugvinovich asked a fellow inmate to secretly pass on a fake confession from an imaginary hitman who claimed Novak paid him 20,000 pounds sterling to end Katherine's life. The story penned by Lugvinovich might have offered a chilling insight into what happened to their victim. According to this fictional hitman, Katherine's body was in the trunk of the car. Novak was very pleased that he ended Katherine's life, the supposed hitman wrote. I helped him place her in the driver's seat. Novak removed the tape from her mouth and put on her shoes. He buckled her seatbelt and kissed her goodbye. At 6 a.m., I approached Katherine's car and, following Novak's instructions, set it on fire. Rafal Novak played the role of a loving boyfriend perfectly in the days leading up to Katherine's demise, holding hands and kissing her in front of family members. He told her mother, Jane, I've lost my world. I've lost my future. Rafal Novak refused to acknowledge his involvement in the young woman's death and went further, telling her mother, Jane Wells Barr, that her daughter was receiving emails and text messages from an ex-boyfriend who said if he couldn't have her, no one could. To complete the narrative, he even claimed she spoke of taking her own life. Worse still, Novak let the distraught Wells Barr parents comfort him, who believed he was also mourning the young woman he loved. Rafal's acting was so convincing that Katherine's mother, Jane, hugged him after her death and allowed him to call her Mom. She said that after the police told her in the early days of the investigation that he was seen more as a witness than a suspect, she decided to offer him all the support possible. I thought if Katherine loved him that much and he was part of our family, then he deserved to come back. The lengthy trial commenced under the chairmanship of Justice Sharp. The jury heard during the trial that the three defendants hoped to receive a life insurance payout of £123,000 sterling and half ownership of a two-bedroom home in Mangold, Somerset, valued at £137,000 sterling, following Katherine Wells Barr's death. The court was told that Rafal Novak showed no emotion when police discovered the woman's body in her burned car on the morning of September 12th. Anna Lugvinovich, who often shook her head and laughed on the defendant's bench when Novak suggested she was responsible for the crime, refused to take the witness stand. Dmitry Sheen also did not testify in his defense during the trial. Sharp told the defendants that the murder was a terrible, merciless crime, cold-bloodedly committed with a gross breach of trust. None of the three showed any emotion during the sentencing. Judge Justice Sharp sentenced the three Polish nationals to mandatory life sentences with a minimum of 32 years in prison without the possibility of early release. You took the life of a beautiful young woman who had everything to live for, all for money, Sharp said. Rafal Novak, the photos of you holding Katherine's hand the evening before her death, buying groceries for what you knew was her last dinner, are utterly chilling. Your emotions were directed only at yourself. Anna Lugvinovich, your behavior was deceitful, manipulative, and cruel. You played your full part in this horrendous crime. And you, Hadeus Dimitrishin, it was a murder for gain. There were substantial aggravating circumstances and no mitigating circumstances. The judge continued, many tears have been shed in this court, but the only tears anyone should shed are for Katherine and her family, her mother Jane, father Philip, and sister Lynn. The judge expressed heartfelt sympathy for Katherine's parents. They could never have known that behind the facade presented to them by Rafal Novak was a person devoid of remorse and decency. It was all about the money, the judge said. Novak and Katherine had no ties binding them. They were not married, nor did they have children. The crime against Katherine was motivated by money, selfishness, and greed, while in the case of Anna Lugvinovich, it stemmed from jealousy and a desire for revenge. At the request of the parents, Judge Justice Sharp read statements from Katherine's mother and sister. Her mother wept in the courtroom as her statement was read. It said, Katherine was a caring, loving, sincere, generous, loyal, thoughtful, exceptional, and amazing young woman. She had a bright and promising future with so much potential. As her parents, Phil and I were immensely proud of the young woman she had become. The manner of Katherine's passing, a cruel, calculated act of villainy, and the hatred shown to her, will haunt us for the rest of our lives. I never got the chance to say goodbye or tell her I love her, or for Katherine to say, "I love you, Mommy." Now, she considers Novak an evil person who should spend the rest of his life behind bars. Katherine's father, Philip, added, "We took him into our home. He became like a son and betrayed us all." During the trial, Rafal Novak, covered in tattoos, wept in the witness box, insisting he had no part in the demise of his true love. A father of one, who has a wife and a teenage son back in Poland, told the jurors, "Everyone is blaming me for something I never did." The court heard that Novak showed no emotion when the police discovered Katherine Wells Barr's body in her burned car on the morning of September 12th last year. Her mother, Jane Wells Barr, told the jurors that he didn't even mention Katherine, instead asking for a steak dinner after his initial release from police custody. Mrs. Wells Barr said that as soon as they bought a house together and took out a life insurance policy, her daughter's fate was sealed. "I told the police her life had a bounty on it. Indeed, she had signed her own death warrant the moment she signed the mortgage. It was all over." Thus, 31-year-old Rafal Novak, a factory worker, was found guilty of the crime against his girlfriend, having suffocated her with a pillow while she slept. Afterward, he orchestrated a conspiracy with his secret lover and her uncle to claim a life insurance payout of £123,000 and a share in the house. His secret lover, 32-year-old Anna Lagvinovich, and her uncle, 38-year-old Tadeusz Dmitryshin, transported Wells Barr's body in her car to a remote location and set it ablaze. It is believed that Lagvinovich and her uncle, 38-year-old Tadeusz Dmitryshin, who also lived in Taunton, took Wells Barr's body in her Ford Focus to a remote location 7 miles from the city. They set the car on fire at 6 a.m., by which time Novak was already at work, providing him with a solid alibi. The jurors of the Royal Court of Bristol found Rafal Novak, Anna Lagvinovich, and Tadeusz Dmitryshin, all originally from Poland, guilty of the crime. The crime was the culmination of months of secret meetings and phone calls between Rafal Novak and his Polish lover, Anna Lagvinovich, with Katherine completely unaware of her role in what turned out to be a love triangle. The accused spent months leading detectives on a false trail, creating fake profiles for the girl on adult websites, and sending her messages from a supposed mysterious lover. Following the verdict, the parents of the young woman who lost her life, Katherine Wells Barr, called for stricter immigration controls. Philip and Jane Wells Barr, who have separated after the tragic loss of their daughter, stated that Rafal Novak, convicted of assaulting his wife in Poland, would not have been allowed entry into the UK if the immigration rules were as stringent as those in the United States of America. They blamed the European Union and stated that the UK needs to tighten its entry measures for foreign nationals. 46-year-old Jane Wells Barr said, "People coming into this country are not checked. We didn't know Rafal had been charged with assault when he was in Poland. I'm absolutely certain our government needs to wake up and stop allowing such negative elements like Rafal Novak to roam freely in the country." Family members of Katherine Wells Barr wept in court as the sentence was announced. The 3 perpetrators showed no emotion. The criminal trio received life sentences without the possibility of parole. Now they have their whole lives ahead to ponder over criminal schemes, but without any chance to put them into practice. Thus, through their own efforts, the Polish immigrants traded their dreams of a successful and wealthy life for free prison cells. After the verdict was announced, the victim's mother spoke her final words, describing her daughter. "She was a beautiful girl, absolutely beautiful. We were so proud when she earned a first-class degree from the University of Bath Spa. She was determined, hard-working, beautiful. We don't know how to go on without her. She had so much to live for. She had such great potential. She had so much for a happy life. But she was robbed, her life taken away. We were robbed." The case of Sheila Labar, a monster with an angelic appearance. Psychological and physical traumas received at an early age can have a very unpredictable effect on adult life. Of course, far from always, they lead to the fact that a person becomes cruel and seeks to hurt others, but sometimes it is the trauma can give rise to a real monster. Criminal psychologist Adrian Rain believes that there are genetic and psychophysical mechanisms that can turn a person into a cold-blooded killer, about which he wrote in detail in his book Anatomy of Violence. History knows a lot of serial criminals who had a truly hellish childhood, and perhaps to them can be attributed our heroine today, Sheila Labar. This woman had an angelic appearance which she skillfully used, seducing her victims and then brutally murdered them. Despite the fact that the court was able to prove only 2 of her crimes, criminologists are sure that there were many more. And now let's look at this difficult story from the beginning and try to understand whether Sheila Labar was a born monster or became him as a result of the cruelty that she faced in childhood. Who is Sheila Labar? Sheila Labar was born in 1958, the 4th of July, in the small country town of Fort Payne, Alabama. She was the youngest of 3 children of her parents and was raised with her brother and sister Lynn. Her childhood was spent in a picturesque but rather secluded place, on a farm nestled among cornfields. According to the memories of Lynn's older sibling, Sheila was an active, inquisitive, and open-minded girl with a creative streak. She liked to be in the center of attention, had a good voice and cute appearance, so perhaps, if her life had turned out differently, she would have become a famous actress or singer. But instead of bright posters, her name decorated the pages of criminal chronicles. The unimaginable cruelty of her father. The head of the family, Manuel Bailey, for many years suffered from alcohol addiction, although it would be more accurate to say that his addiction suffered from his entire family. He often went on binges, turning into a real beast who enjoyed abusing his wife and children. He insulted and humiliated them, beat them with anything that came to hand, could throw everyone out in the middle of the night in a downpour or frost, and locked himself in the house, not letting anyone inside. Mothers, daughters, and sons often had to spend the night in a barn or in the open air in the field. One day, when Manuel was once again in a drunken rage, he began throwing dishes and other objects at his family members. The mother tried to cover the children as best she could, but one of the flower pots thrown by her husband hit her youngest daughter Sheila in the head. Sheila suffered a serious concussion and a lifelong scar on her temple, which she painstakingly covered with her hair. But not even the insults and beatings were the worst thing that the sisters had to endure in their parents' home. According to the memories of Sheila and Lynn, Manuel from an early age forcibly inclined them to intimacy. The mother may have been aware of what was going on, but the subject was never broached. However, despite the nightmare at home, Sheila did well enough in school. She dreamed of leaving the farm as soon as possible and go to conquer the big city. The girl was quite ambitious and determined. She passionately wanted to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or pop singer. And she had everything for this: charisma, bright appearance, and a beautiful voice, adulthood, first marriage. Barely Sheila was 18 years old. She left her parents' home, but adult life was not so joyful. To enter the university, she was not allowed to average score, and to move to the big city, she simply did not have the money. Then Sheila got a job as a maid in one of the hotels, where by that time her older sister was already working. It should be noted that Sheila had a slender figure and a very attractive appearance. She had big blue eyes, a charming smile, and a mop of thick long hair. She was surrounded by attention from men, and over time, she learned to use it and manipulate her suitors. In the late 70s, Labar, then Bailey, met a guy named Jonathan Baxter, and a romantic relationship began between them. Jonathan was not yet 20 years old at the time, but he already had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a hindrance, and soon the couple got married. However, this marriage lasted only a few months and collapsed after Jonathan learned that the young wife abused his daughter while he disappeared at work. Sheila was frankly annoyed with the child, and she would raise her hand or lock her in a closet if she started crying or acting up. Jonathan did not organize scandals and listen to explanations. He just Strasut filed for divorce and put his wife with his belongings outside his house. He never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila dated various men and mostly lived off them. But all these relationships were fleeting and lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months, until in the early 80s she met her future second husband, Ronnie Jennings. The tumultuous romance soon led to marriage, and Sheila took on a double last name, Bailey Jennings. It was an unhealthy relationship between two irascible and unstable people who regularly cheated on each other, scandalized, and even fought. Still, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after another family quarrel, Sheila demanded a divorce from her husband, but he refused her. In fact, Ronnie did not hold on to the relationship at all. He just wanted to piss off his wife and make her mad, and he succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large number of drugs in front of her husband, drinking strong alcohol, and after this infernal cocktail, sat behind the wheel of the car and rushed down the road. Naturally, soon Sheila, under the influence of pills and alcohol, lost consciousness, flew off the road, and at high speed crashed into a tree. She miraculously survived, but suffered a massive head injury. She spent more than a week in a deep coma, and doctors made no prognosis. When Sheila finally regained consciousness and gradually recovered, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital where she spent several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the orderlies was constantly harassing her and possibly taking advantage of her helpless state when she was heavily sedated. After all this, Sheila returned to her second husband's home, but began to behave not just aggressively but threateningly toward him. When during another scandal she attacked Ronnie and poked him in the chest with nail scissors, Ronnie, fearing for his own life and health, filed for divorce and hurriedly moved out of the mad woman. Rich lover. When the second marriage was dissolved, the young woman began looking for lovers through the dating columns of the print media, and she left her ads there as well. But no man did not stay with her for long, because Sheila tended to dominate everything, rigidly suppressing their partners, both in intimate and everyday life. Soon the photo of an attractive girl in the dating section drew the attention of 60-year-old Wilfred Bill Labar. The man had previously been married twice and had adult children and grandchildren from previous marriages. He was widowed a few years ago and had been living alone on his large country ranch ever since. Bill was a fairly wealthy man. He had a chiropractic office in Epping, New Hampshire, and on the ranch he raised horses. At the same time, he was very lonely and needed a strong, powerful woman. In fact, that's exactly what he found. Sheila was attracted by the wealth of her new acquaintance, and she decided that it would be an ideal union for her. And to make Bill completely lost his head, she began to send him a postal mail frank letters, supplementing them with her nude photos. The trap worked, and soon Labar invited a charming pen pal to visit his ranch. Their romance developed rapidly. An elderly man is not stingy on expensive gifts for a young mistress, and in the summer of 1987, she moved to live with him. This has incredibly flattered the doctor, who now went out in public with a beautiful companion who was half his age and was fit for him as a daughter. Nevertheless, he did not plan to marry Sheila. However, Sheila, not waiting for a marriage proposal, changed her name, calling herself Labar. Bill was surprised by this turn of events, but he did not object. Sheila began to interfere in all the affairs of her elderly lover, starting to control his business, finances, and disposition of his property. In addition, Bill was getting older and could not satisfy the intimate needs of a young woman. Then, according to Sheila herself, he allowed her to meet other men whom she often brought directly to their home. One of Sheila's regular lovers, closer to the mid-90s, was a Jamaican national named Wayne Ennis. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as an au pair on the ranch, but soon the young man, with Bill's consent, which was probably given under pressure from Sheila, moved to live in the owner's house. In 1995, Sheila and Wayne officially legalized their relationship, and the spouse considered that from now on, he would be her only man. But soon he realized that he was wrong because his wife continued to meet with different men. Wayne was not satisfied with this, and one day he jumped with fists on Sheila and her next lover, causing them bodily harm. Accustomed to being dominated, Sheila for the first time didn't know how to deal with her third husband, who got into a fight every time a rival appeared on the horizon. Eventually, she filed for divorce and sought a court injunction to stop Wayne from approaching her, accusing him of violence and assault. Another divorce did not affect the turbulent personal life of Sheila, who continued to meet with numerous lovers, changing them like gloves. True, Now her relationship increasingly often began to end with lawsuits from men who accused Sheila not just in cruelty, but also in the threat to their lives and health. Thus, one of her boyfriends she deliberately hit by a car and almost ran over. Another almost broke his head, and another scratched his face so that he was forever scarred. Sheila, with age, became more and more dangerous to others. From every man she demanded obedience, and in cases of disobedience, fell into a rage. In 2000, at the age of 74, Bill Labar died of heart failure. Although doctors and police officers did not see a criminal trail in the death of an elderly man, his family members were convinced that Sheila had something to do with it. In their opinion, she had been poisoning Bill little by little for years, and literally drove him into the light. Despite the fact that Bill and Sheila were never officially married, Sheila, according to the will, became the sole heiress of all his property. The relatives tried to challenge this through the courts, but never got anywhere. They are still convinced that the mistress forced Bill to write the will she wanted. House of Temptation. After Bill's death, as I have already mentioned, all his property came under Sheila's complete control. Now she no longer had to consider anyone's opinion. She could do whatever she wanted with the estate she had inherited. She herself called her home a place of seduction and pleasure where there were no inhibitions. She met men on the streets, in bars, on the internet, lured them to her, and then tried to keep them on the ranch as long as possible. She didn't care about their age, skin color, or any physical appearance. She promised them unearthly pleasure and then sought to suppress and subjugate them to her will. Sheila regularly tried to seduce couriers by meeting them in the nude and offering an alternative method of payment. But she didn't take into account the fact that she herself was not getting any younger and was nowhere near as attractive as she used to be. It got to the point where couriers simply refused to come to her address. Neighbors noticed that on the ranch Labar constantly come different men, but some hurried to leave the place the same day. Others were delayed, but also for a short time. What was going on in the house itself could only be guessed at. Where had Michael DeLorge disappeared to? Soon, Sheila decided to look for lovers among men who were in dire need of housing, money, or those men who suffered from addiction. This category was the most vulnerable, and proved to be an easy prey for the cunning woman, who everywhere posed as a widowed millionaire, and talked about her untold wealth, inherited by her. In 2004, Labar met on one of the city streets homeless man named Michael DeLodge. He was in a difficult life situation and lost literally everything because of addiction to illegal drugs. His relatives tried to send him to a rehabilitation clinic, but he ran away from there and has been loitering ever since. Sheila liked Michael, and she invited him to her, promising shelter, food, and the necessary drugs in exchange for intimacy. Moving to the ranch, the guy was completely dependent on his old mistress. He complied with all her demands, afraid to be on the street again. But Sheila quickly got into the taste, and her desires became more and more sophisticated. She bound, beat, and humiliated Michael, taking pleasure in it. He tried to escape several times, walking dozens of miles and hiding in homeless shelters, but he never decided to go to the police for fear they wouldn't believe him. Meanwhile, Sheila found him each time and brought him back to the ranch. In desperation, he tried to contact his family members and let them know he was in trouble. His loved ones immediately responded to this disturbing news, but it was too late. In October 2005, Michael DeLorge disappeared without a trace. When his family contacted Sheila directly, she stated that she and Michael had broken up. He had left her, and his current whereabouts were unknown to her. Michael did not show up at any of the places he had been to before. No one who knew him had seen him, and there was no way to contact him. Contacting the police was fruitless, and Labar remained beyond suspicion, trusting Kenny County. Sheila's tales of her exorbitant wealth were greatly exaggerated, and the house and automobile had to be maintained, so she was forced to get a job. Naturally, Sheila chose an occupation to her liking. She became an operator of intimate phone services. Since she had a truly enchanting voice, men fell for the bait and offered to meet her in person. Among such guys was Kenny County, who at the time of their acquaintance was barely 24 years old. The young man was attractive in appearance, very good-natured and open. However, He had a low IQ level, due to which he was very gullible. This was exactly the kind of guy Labar was looking for. Kenny was very close to his mother, on whom he actually depended, but Sheila, with the help of clever manipulations, managed to break this connection and literally lure Kenny to herself. She made him an unforgettable night of love and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams, about which he informed his relatives, and then moved to live in Sheila's house. But soon Sheila showed the guy her true face, having arranged for him a real torture room in one of the rooms. Each time, intimacy inevitably turned into a brutal beating or something worse. Kenny's body was covered with bruises, abrasions, scratches, cuts, and burn marks. But he could not leave the house of the mistress who had completely subjugated his will. Sheila did not allow him to see and communicate with his loved ones, and his family could only guess what was happening to Kenny. The first alarm was raised by neighbors who periodically noticed the guy and were horrified by his sickly appearance. A few days before his disappearance, a local store clerk took a picture of the young man on her cell phone camera, and later this picture was attached to the case file in court. In the photo, Kenny's condition could be described as deplorable. He was very thin, there were huge bruises under his eye and on his cheek, and his nose was probably broken. Judging by the degree of healing, all these injuries had been inflicted at different times, which suggested that the guy had been brutally beaten for a long time. The contents of his cart were also alarming. He rolled 2 large canisters of fuel to the cash register, as it later turned out, for his own cremation. The store employees were so puzzled and even frightened by the guy's appearance that they decided to report him to the police for possible domestic violence. But this time, Sheila managed to get away with it, and they could not charge her with anything. Soon Kenny stopped contacting his family altogether, and when his worried mother arrived at Labar's house, the owner behaved aggressively and advised to leave Kenny alone. All subsequent attempts ended similarly, at which point Kenny County's family filed a missing persons report with the police, indicating that he may be being held forcibly at the country ranch, a home crematorium, and gruesome findings. When police arrived at Sheila's home, she claimed that the young man no longer lived with her and claimed that Kenny had run away because his mother, whom he was allegedly terrified of, began visiting them frequently. As evidence, Sheila provided an audio recording in which she asks her lover if his own mother had attacked him, and he quietly gives an affirmative answer. It all seemed more than strange, and the very next day, an officer visiting Sheila secured a search warrant for the estate. Sheila had been on the police's radar many times before, and her name had been linked to another mysterious disappearance of a boyfriend. But over the years, Sheila had never been questioned, and her house and grounds had never been searched. When the police arrived, they did not find Labar at home, but they did see several fires burning near the outbuildings. The fires looked strange and were made of improvised materials, a mattress, fragments of wooden furniture, hay, etc., all doused with a flammable mixture. One of the bonfires had bones in it that clearly looked like human remains. The squad requested reinforcements in the form of forensic experts, reporting all the findings, but that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg compared to what they discovered next. Almost all over the house were found poorly washed traces of blood. It was so much that it seemed as if there had been a real massacre. It turned out that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. The bones smoldering in the fire belonged to the missing Kenny, and there were 2 empty fuel cans lying nearby, the same ones the boy had bought at the local store the day before. But that wasn't all. Also found on the property were the remains of Michael Delage, who had disappeared a few years earlier, and some fingers of some third guy who was never identified. Among other things, a large number of items belonging, judging by the size, to various men were fished out of the sump at the ranch, the fates of which have not been learned. The hostess herself was not at home at the time of the police visit. She had figured it out and gone on the run. Sheila hitchhiked to Boston, where she obviously hoped to get lost. Moreover, on the way, she seduced one of the drivers who gave her a ride, and he trustingly invited her to live in his house. However, the next day, having seen on TV news about the search for a dangerous criminal, the new lover himself called the police. and reported that Sheila is now in his bed. It was there that she was arrested. During the search of Sheila's home, another frightening find was made: a box of videotapes. On the tapes, Kenny, Michael, and several other men confessed to horrific crimes, but judging by the guy's appearance and condition, they made these confessions under torture. Since Labar's arrest, her mental health has raised a lot of questions, so the court ordered the necessary evaluations. Sheila was found to have a delusional disorder, as well as signs of schizophrenia. She called herself an angel sent from heaven to protect children from rapists. It was Sheila's failing mental health that became the basis on which her attorney tried to build a defense. He called his client a profoundly sick person and tried to prove that she was not aware of her actions. The reason for this was the mental and physical trauma she had suffered as a child. The defendant herself claimed that many years ago, when she was in that terrible accident and found herself in a coma on the verge of death, she met with God, and the latter told her to cleanse the world of men who infringe on children. Sheila's ex-husbands and some of Sheila's lovers also spoke in court, who, in one voice, called her a crazy, unstable, and extremely violent woman. And Wayne Ennis, the third husband, said that the ex-wife repeatedly persuaded him to kill Mr. Labar in order to seize his property. But despite the defense's attempts to convince the court that Sheila was insane and in need of treatment, it was proven that she was aware of her actions at the time of her crimes. She was found guilty in July 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of ever being released. All of her appeals were rejected. Sheila is now serving her sentence in Florida at Homestead Correctional Facility. The insane courier of death. How quickly would you open your door if a stranger knocked? Would you inquire about their identity and purpose before unlocking? Most people would, as a reasonable precaution. However, if a courier in a uniform with a package in hand stood on your doorstep, would you still ask questions or would you open right away? Typically, couriers do not arouse suspicion or concern, and people tend to let them in, even when they aren't expecting any delivery. In the summer of 2020, amid the pandemic and total lockdown, when couriers became almost the sole link between people and the outside world, delivering everything from food and essential medicines to work documents, one such delivery person was bringing death to homes. A masked man with a pistol seemed elusive, and it was unclear who his next visit would target. The police, without any leads, were afraid to spread panic. But soon the case took a completely unexpected turn. A fatal incident involving a well-known lawyer. This convoluted story, as it later turned out, had begun many years ago, but its tragic development occurred on July 11th, 2020, in a prestigious cottage area southeast of Los Angeles. There, in one of the elite houses, renowned lawyer Mark Angelucci was waiting out the pandemic, isolated in his spacious mountain estate. Like many others, he continued to work remotely, hoping for the situation in the country and the world to improve. On that day, the 52-year-old homeowner wasn't expecting any visitors or deliveries, but when a courier in FedEx Corporation uniform rang his doorbell with a package in hand, the man, without hesitation, opened the door. The lawyer probably thought that one of his partners or clients had sent some important documents, forgetting to inform him. Nothing indicated trouble, and the person on the doorstep did not seem alarming or suspicious. The courier, appropriately wearing a special protective mask and gloves for that period, had a parcel and an invoice that required a signature. However, as soon as the lawyer was about to receive the package, the delivery person suddenly drew a pistol and fired several shots at close range, aiming for vital organs to ensure the lawyer would be fatally injured. The lawyer had no chance to react, and being unarmed in his home robe, he had no chance of survival. After the deed, the courier simply left the scene, leaving the victim bleeding out on the floor. Since the house was in a rather secluded location, none of the neighbors noticed anything unusual, though sounds resembling shots did prompt them to call emergency services and report the disturbing incident. No leads at all. Mark Angelucci succumbed to his injuries at the scene, and the arriving medics and law enforcement could only confirm he was dead. Upon examining the crime scene, detectives immediately dismissed the notion that robbery was the criminal's motive. The house was truly luxurious, adorned with antique items containing a safe and visibly expensive possessions, yet everything remained untouched. In the lawyer's home office lay a mass of important documents concerning various cases, but these too did not interest the perpetrator. Everything in the house was left undisturbed, nothing was searched or moved, and the criminal did not even cross the threshold of the home. Thus, from the very beginning, the main objective was clearly to eliminate the homeowner. The criminal was caught on several outdoor surveillance cameras, but as he was wearing a company cap from FedEx and a medical mask, it was virtually impossible to discern any distinctive features. All that could be determined was that he was a white male, of average height and slender build. The criminal wore gloves, thus leaving no fingerprints anywhere. Essentially, the only evidence consisted of bullets extracted from the deceased's body. The police were baffled, and initially they decided to investigate the people closest to the lawyer, to understand who might wish him harm and who might benefit from his death. The possibility that the crime was related to his professional activities was also not ruled out. Therefore, it was also necessary to examine which cases the lawyer had been handling recently, whether he had any dissatisfied clients, and whether he had conflicts with any colleagues. There was a vast amount of work to be done, and determining a priority direction seemed impossible at the moment. So they decided to start with the relatives and close friends of the lawyer. Rich, successful, and utterly alone. It soon emerged that Mark was profoundly lonely. No, he had quite a few friends, got along well with colleagues and neighbors, but he had no truly close or familial relationships. His parents had long passed away, Angelucci had no siblings, and he never started his own family. In his youth, the man diligently studied, then he tirelessly built a career in legal practice, where he achieved great heights and recognition. But he intentionally decided to sacrifice his personal life, so at 52, he had never been married and had no heirs. Mark was quite attractive, intelligent, eloquent, always dressed expensively and stylishly, lived in a luxurious home, and drove a luxury car. He was rich and successful, and wherever this man appeared, he literally drew the attention of women, but he did not engage in romances or intrigues, and in principle, always kept his personal life hidden from everyone. This led to many rumors about his orientation, but the lawyer himself never confirmed nor denied them. In his list of contacts, they found a woman named Cassie J., with whom the deceased was very close. Their relationship was not romantic, but rather akin to brotherly sisterly love. She was a journalist and had met the lawyer many years ago while preparing a report on a high-profile case he was handling. The man willingly agreed to help her. They quickly found common ground, got along well, and continued to communicate after their joint work ended. For Cassie, the news of the death of her close friend was a real shock. She described Mark as sincere, kind, and responsive, with an easygoing and cheerful nature, who was involved in charity and always responded to others' troubles. According to her, he had no enemies, at least she was unaware of their existence. But in recent years, he had been among the top lawyers in California and had not lost a single case, so he undoubtedly made some adversaries whom he might not even suspect. The anti-feminist and men's rights advocate. During the investigation, a rather intriguing detail emerged. It was discovered that the lawyer held anti-feminist views, but also supported traditional notions of men and women in family and society without harboring any animosity towards women. He opposed discrimination against men in matters such as child custody, which almost always tend to favor women. Angelucci was a fighter for justice, not male supremacy. He took on some complex cases completely free of charge, helping those who found themselves in trouble. The lawyer noted that with the rise of feminist organization activity, men were almost always presumed guilty from the start in any conflict and doomed to defeat, with no chance to prove their innocence. Over the years, Mark became an activist for men's rights, although in fact, he simply sought to equalize rights for all people. ensuring that everyone could expect a fair judicial resolution in conflict situations, regardless of gender. Given this, it was not possible to exclude the likelihood that radically minded representatives of feminist organizations could have been involved in the lawyer's demise, as the deceased had no family or close people, and there were no leads or clues in the case. The investigation could have stalled and eventually been archived. In response, Cassie J. decided to take initiative. Using her extensive connections in the media, the journalist brought widespread attention to the case, prompting law enforcement to conduct a more thorough investigation. Detectives carefully reviewed the case files that the lawyer had been handling recently, hoping to find any hints. The task was daunting, but before they could find anything, the Courier criminal struck again. Collateral victims, or was the entire family targeted? On July 19, 2020, just a week after the first crime, on the other side of the country in New Jersey, an armed courier paid a visit to the luxurious home of a state federal judge. That day, none of the family members were expecting any deliveries or packages, and they were all self-isolating. Both parents, being lawyers, continued to work remotely, and their college student son was on holiday. The head of the family, a 62-year-old lawyer named Mike Anderell, first noticed the approaching courier while he was on the second-floor balcony of his home. He thought that perhaps some work-related documents awaited his wife and hurried downstairs to open the door. However, his son, who was closer to the front door, opened it without a second thought. They exchanged just a few words before a shot rang out. Mike was descending the stairs at that time, and likely he was the initial target, but his 20-year-old son, Daniel, literally stood between his father and the criminal. The young man took a bullet to the chest, fell to the floor, and the criminal opened fire on the lawyer, wounding him 3 times. The courier, as in the previous case, did not enter the premises but simply turned around and left, leaving the bleeding victims to die. However, there was another person in the house, Judge Esther Salas, who was the wife and mother of the victims. The woman, shortly before the incident, had gone down to the basement to sort through things and did not hear the gunshots. When she came upstairs, she first saw her son lying in a pool of blood at the door. Esther rushed to him, tried to stem the wound, called out for her husband's help, and only then saw that a bloodied Mike was lying on the stairs. Salas immediately called emergency services, reporting the incident, and tried to provide aid to her husband and son herself. By the time law enforcement and paramedics arrived, both men were alive but in extremely critical condition. They were immediately taken to the nearest hospital, where they underwent surgery and, it seemed, their condition was stabilized. The criminal's motive was unclear, and it was also uncertain whether he came to end the life of the judge, her lawyer husband, a former prosecutor, or intended to eliminate the entire family. Again, no traces or clues were found at the scene, and the only evidence consisted of bullets fired at the victims. The Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the case, immediately suspecting a connection between this incident and the murder of Mark Angelucci in California. In both cases, the targets were lawyers, and the shooter disguised himself as a FedEx courier. However, the agents were confident that in the second case, the true target was the judge, and her relatives were merely collateral victims. Eyewitnesses' final account. Ballistic analysis established that the shooter used a .380 caliber pistol in both incidents, and all bullets were fired from the same weapon. This dispelled any remaining doubts that the acts were committed by the same individual. But who was this person? Where could he be found? And where, when, and to whom might he strike next? It was necessary to question the surviving witness who had come face to face with the criminal, and had even exchanged a few words. After a serious surgery, Daniel was in the intensive care unit in critical condition, but when he regained consciousness, he expressed a desire to speak with detectives to tell them everything he had seen. The young man couldn't describe the perpetrator's appearance because he was masked, but he thought the individual was elderly, as he could see gray at the temples, wrinkles around the eyes, and the courier's hands appeared old. Behind the courier, near the road, Daniel noticed a light-colored car though he couldn't remember the make. The student also speculated that the criminal's target might have been his mother, as the attacker had inquired if she was home. However, at that moment, his father appeared on the stairs, apparently startling the criminal. The attacker quickly drew his pistol, shot the young man in the chest, and then began shooting at Mike, wounding him 3 times. After being injured, Daniel remembered nothing until he woke up in the hospital. The student's testimony provided little help to the investigation except to confirm that the shooter was an older white male. Regrettably, Daniel's condition could not be stabilized. He worsened, and the day after speaking with law enforcement, the 20-year-old passed away in the hospital from a resultant internal bleeding. Who is Esther Salas? Thus, detectives unanimously concluded that the main target of the shooter was indeed Esther Salas, but her husband and son were inadvertently in the way, and now the young man was deceased, while his father still hovered between life and death. It was urgent to understand what linked Salas and the earlier deceased Angelucci, what cases they were handling, and if they had common adversaries. Esther Salas was born in 1968 in Monterey Park, California. She had Cuban roots on her mother's side and Mexican on her father's. The girl who grew up in poverty achieved everything in life through her intellect and hard work. She attended Rutgers University for law school and earned her Juris Doctor in 1994. She built a stellar career, progressing from a clerk to an assistant U.S. public defender and eventually to a United States magistrate judge in New Jersey. She also served several years as the president of the Hispanic Lawyers Association. Since 2011, she had been a judge for the U.S. District Court for the District of New Jersey. In 1993, Esther married renowned lawyer Mike Andrell, who was 11 years her senior. The couple desperately dreamed of having a child, but Esther struggled to conceive. After 4 consecutive miscarriages, doctors declared that she would never have children. However, a miracle happened on July 13, 2000, when the couple's only child, a son named Daniel, was born. The spouses adored their child, raising him in an atmosphere of love and care, striving to provide him with the best education and wide opportunities in life. Unfortunately, just a week after the young man celebrated his 20th birthday, he was gone. An unexpected turn in the case. News about a courier criminal operating across the country went viral on the internet, spreading rapidly and sowing panic among the population. With no precise information available about the investigation, wild rumors about the case began to emerge. People simply feared opening their doors to couriers, even though during the pandemic, they were often the bearers of necessities. Several days later, on a deserted dead-end road near Rockland in northern New York, an abandoned beige sedan was found. Nearby lay the body of a man with a gunshot wound to the head. Documents found in the car quickly helped identify the deceased as 72-year-old Roy Den Hollander, a once successful lawyer. Near the body lay a pistol, and the scene resembled a self-deprivation of life, as there were no signs of struggle or the presence of third parties. These assumptions were soon confirmed, as the murder weapon bore only the victim's fingerprints. However, the weapon itself drew significant interest from investigators. It was a .380 caliber pistol, identical to the one used to end the lives of Mark Angelucci and Daniel Andrell. Ballistic analysis soon confirmed that all 3 men were deprived of life by bullets fired from this pistol. Yet, it remained unclear what motivated the shooter to end the lives of 2 men, injure another, and then fire a bullet into his own head. A search of Hollander's home indicated that he had meticulously planned the attacks in advance. His diary contained addresses of the victims and notes on the dates of the attacks. Detectives, however, could not understand the criminal's motive. However, when they found memoirs on his laptop, which Roy had been working on for years, it became clear that he was a mentally unstable individual, embittered and angry at the world, who despised everyone from his own mother and ex-wife to his neighbors, colleagues, and clients. It was only a matter of time before he would take up arms and begin to end lives. Who was Roy Den Hollander? Roy Den Hollander was born on September 26, 1947, in Midland Park, New Jersey. He had an older fraternal twin brother who died under mysterious circumstances in childhood. Roy blamed his mother for this his entire life, a sentiment he openly discussed in his memoirs, along with his hatred for his parents. He graduated from high school in 1965, then attended the prestigious George Washington University Law School, and later earned an MBA from Columbia Business School. He worked as a lawyer at several renowned firms, and in the late 1990s, he moved to Russia, where he lived for several years, working as a lawyer and private detective at Kroll Associates, a consulting firm specializing in financial issues and risk. Hollander earned significant money, which he immediately spent in various elite entertainment venues on young, beautiful women who were his main weakness. In 2000, at a Moscow nightclub, the 52-year-old American lawyer met a 24-year-old beauty named Angelina Shipolina. Previously a professional track athlete, she later decided to switch to modeling, possessing all the attributes necessary to succeed in that field. The aspiring model quickly realized that the older American was utterly infatuated with her and decided to use him for her purposes. She swiftly swept him off his feet and gently nudged him towards marriage. After moving to the United States and obtaining a marriage visa, she soon filed for divorce. Now, Angelina could legally stay in the country and pursue her modeling career. For the lawyer, this turn of events was a huge blow. He realized that the beauty had merely used him to achieve her own goals, playing with his emotions. He came to despise all women, a sentiment he eloquently expressed in his memoirs. He referred to his former wife as a venal woman, willing to do anything for money, and also accused her of connections with the Russian mafia. Fundamental stance and puzzling motives for the crimes. Following his tumultuous divorce from Shipolina, Roy became a self-proclaimed anti-feminist and an active advocate for men's rights. However, his behavior grew increasingly eccentric and flamboyant. Unlike Angelucci, who provided free assistance to men affected by domestic abuse and handled custody issues during divorces, Hollander became notorious for his frivolous and unsuccessful lawsuits. For instance, he objected to ladies' night promotions in bars and nightclubs where women are offered free admission and complimentary drinks. Yet, it remained unclear why Roy chose his victims and sought to deprive them of life. The situation with Angelucci was particularly puzzling, since they were effectively colleagues, both fighting for men's rights. The answer to this question was soon found in the criminal's memoirs. It turned out that Roy saw Mark as a rival and was extremely jealous of him because Mark was far more successful in his career, commanded widespread respect, and held considerable influence, whereas Hollander had been mostly ridiculed for his antics and bizarre lawsuits over the last decade. Furthermore, both lawyers were members of the same men's rights community, making Roy appear even more outlandish and unsuccessful by contrast. About a year before these tragic events, he was expelled from the community for aggressive and inappropriate behavior. Roy's personal life and career spiraled downward after his divorce from the Russian model. He fell into depression, developed problems with alcohol and anger management, and started losing most of the cases he took on. Esther Salas, as a judge, presided over several cases Hollander had handled at different times, consistently ruling against him, which led him to long-list her as one of his sworn enemies. However, neither Salas, Angelucci, nor any of their colleagues considered Roy to be dangerous. But in 2018, when he was diagnosed with cancer, the lawyer likely felt he had nothing left to lose and began devising a plan for revenge and the elimination of his enemies. The long list of revenge. Hollander never made explicit threats, so it was difficult to determine whom he considered his enemies. However, in his memoirs and notebooks, a lengthy list of names was found with whom the lawyer apparently planned to settle scores. This list included not only judges and fellow lawyers, but also the doctors who treated him, whom he accused of incompetence and intentionally treating him poorly, allowing his disease to progress. Detectives checked all the other individuals on the list and, ensuring they were alive, warned them of potential danger, as it was unclear whether the criminal had acted alone or had accomplices. It also remained unclear why Roy stopped and unexpectedly settled accounts with life. There was speculation that this was due to the deteriorating state of his health. Hollander's memoirs contained over 2,000 pages. Also, about a dozen notebooks and diaries were found among his personal belongings, which needed to be meticulously examined. This process took several weeks, but ultimately established that the criminal acted alone and had no accomplices, meaning that everyone else on the list was safe following Roy's death. Daniel Anderl's Law. After the attack, Mike Anderl spent over half a year in the hospital undergoing a challenging rehabilitation process due to 3 gunshot wounds. His wife, Esther Salas, remained in a prolonged state of depression due to the loss of their only son. However, in February 2021, she agreed to give an extensive interview for the television news magazine 60 Minutes, where she spoke publicly for the first time about the horrific events and the tragedy that struck their family. Simultaneously, the judge began working on legislative changes in New Jersey. A new law, adopted in December 2021, was named after her late son, Daniel. The new amendments introduced a prohibition on the public disclosure of judges' addresses and other contact information, ensuring the safety and privacy of public officials and their family members.